गुड इवनिंग एवरीवन। बड़ा दिल खुश हो जाता है, बड़े लाइवली बच्चे हो आप, आपकी चैट्स वगैरह पढ़ के बड़ी मतलब हर्षोल्लास हो जाता है मन में। ठीक है, तो टेलीग्राम ग्रुप बना लो, बढ़िया व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप बना लो, बिल्कुल बढ़िया तरीके। ठीक है, and yes, I agree with the comment that all the future bureaucrats, I welcome you to today's class. In the last class we were discussing the American Revolution 1765 to 83. आपने एक चीज नोटिस करी है, whenever I write anything on the board, when it is, let's say, or speak like American Revolution, I always mention the year along with it. The reason for this is that maybe I mentioned in the first class also, a very good way to remember the years is to always put those years in your vocabulary or in your writing whenever you come across that event. For example, let us take the case of Kalyani. Okay, so Kalyani is saying good evening to everyone, good evening everyone. So now for the first time, let's assume for the first time I have heard this name Kalyani, right? But imagine that the date of birth of Kalyani is 1993. And Kalyani's name would have come on the screen always whenever he or she would have typed as Kalyani 93 or Kalyani 1993. Do you think I'll ever forget that what is the year of birth of Kalyani? Why do we not forget that James Bond is 007? Because whenever for the first time when we heard James Bond, simultaneously we heard 007. So that's why I make it a habit whenever you are, because my memory is pretty weak, so therefore whenever I came across this problem of remembering the years, it was very tough for me. So therefore it is through this particular technique I sort of like found out that this is a good way to memorize. Plus psychology was my subject, so I applied some of psychology into the preparation also. Right, so in the last class we were discussing the American Revolution and what has so far happened in the American Revolution. First of all, we mentioned that we have talked about the reasons, right? So we have talked about the, let's say, the things which we have mentioned is proclamation. Proclamation of 1763 we have talked about. Apart from this, what we have talked about is, so this proclamation, it barred the settlers to expand beyond the Appalachian Mountains, and this proclamation, it created the reserve for the original inhabitants of the American lands, that is the American Indians. Apart from this, before this we have discussed the 7-Year War, right? So basically, broadly, if we take the reasons of the American Revolution, then these aspects, they become the reasons. These aspects we have discussed in the previous class. Now, what had happened is that through the Stamp Act of 1765, the British Parliament, has the legislative power to make a law for the 13 colonies. They want to, what does the British state wants? The British state, it wants to extract the money from the 13 colonies. It wants to do recovery of the war expenditure. Specifically, the Stamp Act said that whatever the money it will be collected through this application of the stamp tax, it will be utilized for maintaining the army of the British, which is present in the 13 colonies. So therefore, when it comes to the arms and ammunition procurement, when it comes to the food supplies, when it comes to the salaries of the soldiers of Britain who are present in the 13 colonies, then these aspects, then it will be provided for by the receipts or by the money which we have got from the Stamp Act of 1765. Okay. Now, as a result of this Stamp Act of 1765, what happened? The people of the 13 colonies, they started assaulting the tax inspectors on the streets. So imagine what will happen if you become an IRS officer and your inspector, he is inspecting any particular establishment और वहां से पिट के वापस आ गए. ठीक है, रेवेन्यू मिला नहीं, बेइज्जती हुई वो अलग. ठीक है, so बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है. Now tax inspectors are being attacked. Apart from this, what began? The second aspect is that the boycott of the British goods began. कि भैया हम वहां हर्ट करेंगे ब्रिटिश को जहां पे उनको सबसे ज्यादा पेन होगा. Right? So therefore they have introduced the Stamp Act of 1765. The reason for that is that the British government is under debt. Why the government is under debt? Because the British government had floated bonds. It had sold bonds to the people. Right? Whenever any entity wants to borrow something, then borrow money, then they float bonds. Right? So therefore, for example, in the economics आपने पढ़ा होगा that one can dilute equity, one can make a person partner and in return take money, or one person can take a loan, and loan is taken by selling bonds to the people. People buy that bond, the money, it goes into the pocket of the government, and the government promises that after 5 years or after 7 years, I'll return your money with interest. And the government, it was under debt. So therefore, it had brought out this Stamp Act of 1765 because of the economic issues. So therefore, the people of the 13 colonies, they realized कि इनका pain point है economy. The pain point is economy. So therefore, let us boycott the British goods which are imported into the 13 colonies. When we boycott the British goods which are imported into the 13 colonies, as a result, what will happen? The sales of the British goods, they will go down. Right? When the sales of the British goods go down, as a result, the British state as a whole and the businessmen of Britain, they will lose money. Because earlier we were selling something to the 13 colonies. Now since no one is buying our products, as a result, our sales are going down, our revenues are going down. Right? So therefore, as a result of this Stamp Act, ये हमारे last class तक हमने किया था. As a result of this, so basically overall what is happening is, so these are the, इन सारी चीजों का इफेक्ट क्या होता है? इन सारी चीजों का इफेक्ट होता है, first of all, boycott of British goods, right? So this boycott of British goods, what it will do? This will hurt the British economy. Second of all, plus violence against tax inspectors, वो तो खैर चलो छोटा सा ही point है. Second of all, what they do is they come together and they hold a congress or they hold a meeting which is known as Stamp Act Congress. And in the Stamp Act Congress, they come out with a petition. Petition means a request to the British Crown that, sir, we are loyal to you, but your parliament does not have the right to levy taxes on us. Why? Because of the concept of no taxation without representation. This era of 1700s was an era where Enlightenment thoughts were coming into picture. The Enlightenment thoughts we will be discussing when we discuss the impact of the American Revolution. That what are these, these kind of things. अभी भी discuss कर सकते हैं, ठीक है? बाद में भी कर सकते हैं, बाद में कर लेंगे, ठीक है? अभी story events वाली चल रही है. तो Enlightenment thoughts का मतलब था like what you see around yourself in the present modern day polity. Whenever you have read the Indian Constitution or you have gone through the polity class, so when you discuss things like fundamental rights, when you talk about separation of power between the, separation of power between the executive, the legislature and the judiciary, when you talk about system of checks and balances, when you talk about right to vote, when you talk about legal rights, when you talk about right to property, these are, when you talk about democracy, that the government should be elected by the people. So these thoughts were new in the era of 1700s, right? Because what was there before that? Before that, as such, there was no democracy and there were kings and the subjects. So therefore, modern polity, what is Enlightenment thoughts or Enlightenment movement of 18th century? Modern polity. So before modern polity, there was the kings and the subjects and the concepts of fundamental rights, etc. As such, they were not into the practice. Right? So therefore, no taxation without representation was one of such thought process in the domain of polity, that the taxation, it can be applied by a government if the people are represented in that government. And how will they be represented in that government? Through democracy. Right? For example, today you have voted for the Modi government. right? So you are represented in the government, or even if you have not voted for the Modi government, since India has a democracy, so therefore the government has a responsibility. It is your representative, right? So therefore, second aspect is the Stamp Act Congress. It happened. And it gave declaration. It is a petition, declaration of rights and grievances. So basically what it is, it says, ये पिछली क्लास में डिस्कस किया है, सो इसे लिख रहे हैं, we are loyal but British Parliament does not have the right to tax the 13 colonies. Why? Because of the concept of no taxation without representation. Okay? So this much is there. So this petition that they give simultaneously. So this is happening at the political level, at the grassroots level, at the street level. Street action, it is also taking place through the boycott of the British goods. As a result, what happens? As a result, in the last class we discussed that both of these two things, they result in creating a huge amount of pressure on the British government, and the British government, British Parliament, they repeal the Stamp Act of 1766. The British, they repealed the Stamp Act 1765 when? In 1766. But now what happens? Now see the principle of no taxation without representation. The principle was not no Stamp Act without representation. The principle was no taxation without representation. So therefore, now by tasting victory, the people of the 13 colonies, that is the European settlers, they got even more emboldened and they continued the boycott of the British goods. And the effect was such that in a very short amount of time, the British imports into the 13 colonies, they got halved. That means half of the revenues which were coming from the 13 colonies through export of British goods into the 13 colonies, those revenues, they got halved. They were lost. So therefore, ये बात भी हमने डिस्कस करी थी. British exports to the colonies, they are halved, right? So 13 colonies, they continue to boycott the British goods. Why? Because no taxation without representation is the philosophy, and they want repeal of all the taxes. And what is the impact? The impact is the British exports to the colonies have halved. Now, I would also like to demonstrate you that what is the utility of why do I teach you like this? I could have simply dictated. It would be very easy for me to कि मैं कोई मेहनत ना करूं, मैं कुछ बोर्ड पे ना लिखूं और मैं आपको पढ़ा दूं. The reason is कि see, my goal, my purpose here is to make you understand things, right? मेरा passion है. Passion क्या है कि चीजें समझ में आए. और as a student जो चीजें मैंने सीखी हैं, those things I want to teach you, not just the world history. I want to teach you how to make notes, how to make flowcharts. What is the utility? For example, when you now the details about these things we have discussed in the previous class. But now what becomes important is summarizing them. So therefore, see, visually if you look at it, then you know a student can look at the flow chart and he says that okay, 7-year war happened, proclamation came, Stamp Act 1765 happened, mercantilism of British was there. Okay, so these are the reasons. What is the effect? Effect is they are boycotting the British goods. Stamp Act, Congress it is happening, right? They are giving a petition, right? जिसके अंदर ये चीज था, ठीक है? So and similarly आगे क्या? So basically what has happened is instead of going into complex English, instead of writing beautiful languages etc, point is कि समझ में आया नहीं. And समझ में आने के लिए 2-3 things are the basic things. First of all, what was an event, why that event happened, right? And what was the impact of that event. So therefore, effect, it means impact. These are why of the event. These are the impacts of the event, right? And impacts, they are continuing. Right? So इस तरीके से if we try to organize our thought process, तो ये आपको हर subject में help करेगा, be it any subject, right? So therefore try to approach it like this. So as a result, what happens is that the British exports to the colonies, they are halved. When the British exports, इधर आ जाओ ना, मुझे दिखाओ, हीरो तो हमें यहाँ पे अभी, ठीक है? When the British exports, भाई मंच मिला है तो कुछ टाइम के लिए सही, हीरो तो हम ही हैं, ठीक है? When the British exports, they are halved. As a result, what happens? The British, they come under immense pressure. And once they come under the immense pressure, after that, what do? They basically, they say that, okay, we are going to repeal all the taxes except for tax on tea. हम सारे taxes हटा रहे हैं, ठीक है? Except for tax on tea. Sir, how we will make notes in our copies of A4 size? कुछ नहीं है. For example, if you have, देखो मैं आपको टाइम देता हूँ, I give you time to make notes. So basically you can start writing like this. By the time I have finished the board, you know that okay how much content is to be written. Okay, so when you write it down, कोई problem नहीं है. मैं right में जा रहा हूँ, आप नीचे चले जाना. इसमें क्या है? For example, अगर आपका ये A4 भर जाता है, इसे A4 तो नहीं, half भरेगा A4 इससे, तो ये जो मैंने चीजें राइट में लिखी, आप इसको 2 डंडियों को नीचे लगा देना, उसके अगले पेज पे लगा देना, क्या प्रॉब्लम है, राइट? तो उससे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं पड़ता, बिकॉज आपका थॉट प्रोसेस ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. ऐसा जरूरी नहीं कि हमको एक ही पेज में, वी वांट द नोट्स इन 1 पेज. दैट इज नॉट माई गोल. माई गोल इज टू क्रिएट द फ्लो. ठीक है, तो ये जो 2 डंडियां हैं इसको नीचे लगा देना भाई, अगले पेज पे लगा देना, क्या प्रॉब्लम है? ठीक है, सो डू नॉट वरी अबाउट दैट. So therefore, as a result, what happens is, after this, except for tax on tea. Okay. Now I am going to give you, now idea here is, so what is the rationale? Why? Why on tea? Matlab, tea, the Britishers actually, they used to circulate the Chinese tea all across the world and they used to earn profits. Okay. Now my question to you is that why did the Britishers, they repealed all the taxes but not the tax on tea? And I will give you an answer, and the answer is that, मतलब ये चीज आंसर नहीं है कि रेवेन्यू बहुत ज्यादा, पैसा बहुत ज्यादा आता था चाय बेचने से. So it was not the reason. The revenues which were coming, the tax revenue which was coming on the sales of tea or on the custom duties which were coming on the basis of export of tea into the 13 colonies, that was not the reason. Finance was not the reason. कि बहुत बड़ा important source of revenue है, that was not the reason. So now I ask you, right, if you have studied, right, if you have studied polity, then my question to you is this: what can be the reason? My question to you is why they are not repealing the tax on tea? And finance is not the reason. ऐसा नहीं है सर टी से बहुत पैसा आता होगा, नहीं, that is not the reason. They are repealing all the taxes except for one tax. टी भी भूल जाओ. Forget that it is a tax on tea. They are repealing all the taxes except for one tax. Why? The student who gives me this answer, that student उसका सिलेक्शन तो डेफिनेटली 100% हो ही रहा है, एंड दैट स्टूडेंट इज ऑल्सो अ वेरी गुड स्टूडेंट ऑफ पॉलिटी. Okay, that student is a very good student of polity. Okay, international relations, monopoly to impose their authority, right to levy tax, they are charging every country royalty. So Kanika is getting selected definitely. Okay, and especially if Kanika has not studied world history, then Kanika is definitely getting selected. Okay, vital addictives, so because it can't be avoided, authority, sovereignty, right to levy tax, because it maintains their power to maintain consistency, right to levy. Tanvi is also getting selected definitely to keep a control on the colonies, monopoly, no authority, because colonies are our authority of Britain, where there is no tax, lose control over colonies. Not to lose authority, yes, not to lose authority. Rajavant is also getting selected. All of those who have mentioned power, then symbolic representation of monarchy, monopoly on free trade, nahi, continuity out of debt, nahi, right, to maintain charge of tax over some area for taxes. Okay, so all of those you who have used different words so that they can rein their tax afterwards, ये भी related है, so that they have at least one purpose. नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है, to maintain authority in the colonies. Yes, so all those students, right? Okay, classes should be in continuation. It breaks the flow of understanding. I would request Vision to complete 1 or 2 subjects at max. Please read this, sir. Okay. नहीं, देखो क्या है ना, उसके पीछे अलग रैशनल होता है. उसके पीछे रैशनल ये होता है कि है उसके पीछे रैशनल ये है कि फॉर एग्जांपल इफ यू आर डूइंग वन सब्जेक्ट कॉन्टिन्यूसली, कि पहले एक कंप्लीट हुआ, दूसरा कंप्लीट हुआ, तीसरा कंप्लीट हुआ, वैसे प्रिपरेशन होती नहीं है, कभी भी नहीं होती. इवन मतलब मैं 5-6 साल पहले जब मैं प्रिपेयर करता तब भी नहीं. Subjects, 2-3 subjects, 3-4 subjects, they travel parallelly, right? Because then what happens is multiple cheeses. For example, if you do not like that subject, then you are like, we have joined the Vision, but I am not able to have interest in this particular subject. अब मैं क्या करूं? मेरी तो preparation बेकार चल रही. You will go into depression, right? Multiple subjects to prevent monotony, and because when you read newspaper every day, some content is coming from polity in the newspaper, some content is coming from history, etc. So therefore, जो कर रहे हैं ठीक हो रहा है, ऐसा ठीक वो नहीं है, right? So okay, so basically yes, all of those students, and especially I see the female students, being bang on polity. All of those students who have mentioned authority, all of those students who have talked about right to levy, like Kanika was the first one to mention this, right? So therefore, if you have not studied the notes of the world history and if you are still answering this, then it is brilliant. Then your preparation, मतलब बाकियों का भी अच्छा है, उनको मैं right track पे ले आऊंगा, ठीक है? Just as a thing. So basically, what will happen is that the revenues were not important. What was important was that symbolically, if the Britishers, after coming under the pressure of all of this movement which is taking place, if they succumb to the people of this 13 colonies, to the settlers of the 13 colonies, or to the 13 colonies, and then they say that yes, we are repealing all taxes, that would mean that the Britishers are agreeing to this concept of no taxation without representation, or the Britishers are agreeing that the British Parliament indeed does not have a right to tax the colonies. So if the Britishers had withdrawn all the taxes, two components are there. One component is the economic component. That is, when people pay taxes, then money goes out of their pocket. Second component is of polity. Second component is of political philosophy, the impact things have. So therefore, they are ready to ease the burden on the pockets of the people of 13 colonies, understanding their grievances, but they are not willing to give up the right to tax the colonies. Why? Because it would mean that the British Parliament is giving up their authority, their right to rule, their right to make laws for the colonies. So therefore, that is the answer. right? So that is why this particular thing is done. So therefore this is happening. Now things are going on, okay, problems are, मतलब ये चीज चले जा रही है. Now what happens is, after this comes, right? After this comes what? After this comes your 1773, an event takes place which is known as Boston Tea Party. What is this Boston Tea Party? तो ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि चार लोगों ने मिलकर चाय की पार्टी करी. मतलब you would have seen certain kids at your place, at your home, or कभी आपने देखा, या फिर जब आप छोटे थे आपको याद हो, your pillow fight is happening, or children are throwing things out and they are saying, hey, party, right? party हो रही है, ठीक है? ये मैं हूं, ये चाय, और ये मैं चाय समुद्र में फेंक रहे हैं और ये पार्टी हो रही है, ठीक है? That is Boston Tea Party. क्या है? ये मैं हूं, ये चाय, ये समुद्र है और ये पार्टी हो रही है. Meaning is Boston Tea Party. So basically the Britishers, they used to circulate the Chinese tea all across the world, and even to they used to export the Chinese tea to the 13 colonies. One colony was Massachusetts, and one port, important port in the Massachusetts was your Boston. Like one of the important port of Maharashtra is Bombay port, right? Or Nhava Sheva port. So therefore, similarly, in Boston was a port of the colony of Massachusetts, that is one of the 13 colonies. Now, since this tussle was going on with respect to the tax on tea, so therefore at this point of time there was a British ship which was carrying a lot of tea, and it was parked on the port. And the settlers, that is the people of the 13 colonies, they were not allowing this tea to be offloaded into the colonies. मतलब भाई offload हो और market में जाए, वैसा हम allow नहीं कर रहे. Ship खड़ी हुई है, उसके अंदर चाय है और बस वो वहां खड़ी हुई है बहुत टाइम से, right? So therefore there comes one moment when there is this conflict between the authorities and between the people. So therefore there comes one point where in the dark of the night, some American settlers, they go to the ship and they offload all the tea into the sea. That is, they destroy the cargo of tea, that is, they destroy the tea which is there on the ship. This particular event, it is known as Boston Tea Party, right? What is the rationale? मेरे ख्याल से यही होगा, party हो रही है, ठीक है? Otherwise there is no rationale for this name. But the Boston Tea Party is destruction of the tea cargo which was there on a British ship which was on the Boston port. Okay, so Sumit is saying Red Indians it was not the Red Indians. I deliberately avoided it because history is controversial about it. So these American settlers who destroyed this tea cargo, they were dressed as American Indians. What do you mean by dressed as American Indians? So like, tribes, they wear different kind of clothes. So they were dressed like this. There is no rationale to it. कुछ उसका reason नहीं है. मतलब if they were trying to symbolically uplift the status of the American Indians against colonialism, वैसा नहीं है, because the people of 13 colonies, they themselves were exploiting the American Indians, right? Maybe they wanted to evade detection by the Britishers that कि ये काम किया किसने, तो वो important part नहीं है. The important part is that the settlers, that some of the people from among the settlers, they destroyed the tea cargo. All these are effects. These are the events during the American Revolution, right? So effect part is that ये सब चीजें, all of these things were there. It resulted in American Revolution. So American Revolution begins in 1765. So therefore, as soon as the boycott of British goods begins, as soon as Stamp Act Congress, it happens. This is beginning of the American Revolution. So effect is beginning of this American Revolution, and these are the events which are taking place. Okay. So these are the events which are taking place, right? So Boston Tea Party. ठीक है. So therefore this thing happens. Will there be a British reaction? So there was a British reaction now. British are saying that, see, we have repealed all the taxes. We have, we have come more than the halfway, right? And the tax on tea will remain because we want to ensure that you understand that we have the authority to levy taxes on you. We are not giving up the authority to tax. We are only giving up taxes, not the authority to tax, right? We are not giving that up. So therefore now when you are engaging in this particular aspect, that you are destroying property, right? You're destroying property. So therefore, अच्छा एक ना बड़ी interesting चीज मैं आपसे पूछना चाहता हूँ, ठीक है? बाद में भी आएगा. What is the meaning or what is the most important thing in democracy for capitalists? What is the most important? What is the meaning of democracy? The number one meaning of democracy for capitalists, or why do capitalists they favor democracy? इससे भी आपकी पॉलिटिक्स का ज्ञान पता चलेगा. बताओ मेरे को. Today we call them, पहले तो एक बात, again I'll be requesting that please post your message to the batch coordinators. Otherwise, ऐसा नहीं, हमें एक systematic तरीके से चलना है. Free market, nah. Accumulation of wealth related है. Vishal has given the right answer, right? So the right answer is just for the purposes of understanding, right? Because in a way 2 wars began because of this. One is the Opium War and second is the American War of Revolution, which will begin. We will see. It has a role. So Vishal has answered very clearly, right to property. That is the most important. So he was the first one. So that's why I'm mentioning his name. Others have also mentioned, right? So I cannot read out all the answers because of the time paucity, but right to property. See, before the era of democracy, the people who were the rulers, be it the king or the nobility, that is the nobles, they could take over the property of non-nobles or, people who are not high-born at any point of time. A businessman will make investments into a factory, or he will make investments into trading or anything when he knows that my capital is secure. The state will not come tomorrow and say that this is mine. अच्छा भाई अंबानी तूने बहुत पैसे कमा लिए, चल यार दे दे इधर. ऐसे थोड़ी चलता है, right? So therefore security of property. So what is the primary, why do the capitalists they want democracy? Because democracy says that there will not be denial of any property without due process of law or without law, or property can be taken away from the people but only as per the law. Examples: property is tangible property, property is intangible property. For example, if this bottle is there, it is also a property, but the money in my account, that is also a property, right? So therefore point is that when this security of property रहता है तो उसी से ही कैपिटलिस्ट जो है वो उसके लिए सबसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट, दैट आई शुड बी having security of property. Otherwise, I'm working hard doing all of this business. If I do not have security of property, then what? So therefore security of property is very, very important, and Britain was the first democracy, right? So around the time period of 1651, English Civil War happened. Now it is before our syllabus, so that's why we have not discussed it, but it is there in the notes. Then in 1688, a glorious revolution, it happened in England, right? Normal है, पढ़ लेना, ज़्यादा कुछ बड़ा नहीं है, but the point is that Britain was the first democracy, and in the democracy the spirit of rule of law is there. And what is rule of law? We will not take away, one of the major component of rule of law is we will not take away your property without, until unless it is prescribed by the law. For example, every year we pay taxes, right? But you see, each tax is a result of a law. So therefore money is a property. So every year the government through the income tax department takes away our property, but it is as per law, right? So therefore democracy does not mean absolute right to property. Democracy means right to property subject to law. Okay, सो देयरफॉर ये चीज जैसे इंटरेस्टिंग है तो मैंने सोचा डिस्कस कर लेते. सो व्हाट इज द ब्रिटिश रिएक्शन? सो बेसिकली दे हैव डिस्ट्रॉयड property of some British businesses, plus otherwise also it is an act of sort of like a revolt. So therefore at this point of time the British reaction is that they take away the right to self-government of Massachusetts. They take away the right to self-government of Massachusetts as a punishment. Through the coercive acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts of 1774. A question should come to our mind. A question should come to our mind that, sir, right to self-government? Sir, wait. When we were discussing the reasons, you have mentioned mercantilism of Britain, that is colonialism of Britain. Mercantilism of Britain, that is colonialism of Britain. Again and again, sir, you have mentioned that these were the 13 colonies and the right to make laws over these 13 colonies was with the मदर कंट्री दैट इज ब्रिटेन. दैट मीन्स इट वाज कोलोनियलिज्म गोइंग ऑन. और सर इतना तो हमें पता है क्योंकि इंडिया वाज आल्सो अ कॉलोनी, सो देयरफॉर दैट मीन्स की आजादी नहीं है. सो व्हाट यू आर सेइंग राइट टू सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट, मतलब राइट नाउ यू आर सेइंग, इधर ले आओ, तेजी से ले आओ और धीरे धीरे करने की जरूरत नहीं है. राइट नाउ यू आर सेइंग that the Britishers they are taking away right to self government. R to self government is right to. बार बार RIGHT लिखने का क्या पॉइंट है? R to self government लिख दो. Take away right to self government of Massachusetts by passing a law. That means this obviously can be taken away अगर ये already पहले था उनके पास. So what is the meaning? The meaning is, see, the right to self-government, it means that instead of, yes, not having complete independence, but in the domestic affairs, self-government was given. That is, the British government will be, or the British Parliament will be concerned only regarding the important subjects. It will be concerned regarding the defense of the 13 colonies. It will be concerned regarding the military usage in the 13 colonies. It will be concerned regarding the fiscal policies or the economic policies of the 13 colonies. But the local self-government, it is with the colonies. For example, today in India also we have local self-government, right? But through the Panchayati Raj institutions. So we have devolved power. So similarly, just in case if you have read the modern Indian history, so therefore there also before your 1929 declaration of Poon Swaraj through the Lahore session, before that, before 1929, the demand of Indian nationalists was self-government, not full independence. Right? So what do you mean by self-government without full independence? It means that some of the important subjects, they will be important, but very few subjects, they will be with the colonial country, whereas the colony will have all the other areas. राइट. सो देखो उनका यार अपना छोटा मोटा जो काम है, कहाँ रोड बनाना है, ठीक है, कहाँ टेलीफोन का खंबा गाड़ना है, ठीक है, कहाँ कुछ और करना है, ये छोटे मोटे काम तुम देख लो यार, तुम्हें जो भी करना है तुम कर लो, ठीक है. इन दोज एरियाज का कहाँ सीवर खुदना है, कहाँ क्या होना है यार तुम देख लो यार, कोई बिल्डिंग बनाए तुम देख लो. हमें परेशान होगा. हमें वी आर ओनली कंसर्न अबाउट द डिफेंस ऑफ आवर कॉलोनीज, द मॉनेटरी रिवार्ड्स विच आर कमिंग from the colonies and fiscal policy. हमें ये concern. So therefore self government was given to those people, okay, to the settlers. So this is the thinking. Coercive acts or intolerable acts. So basically इसमें क्या है? So the Britishers they called it coercive acts, whereas the Americans, that is the people of the 13 colonies, they will call it intolerable acts. Okay. So therefore this is a British reaction in 1774. When they give a reaction, so automatically now comes the reaction of the 13 colonies. That is American reaction. How do they react? So therefore their reaction is, so what is the reaction? Their reaction is First Continental Congress. First Continental Congress, okay, it happens in New York, right? It happens in 1774, 75, एक बार let me check. It happens in 1774. Not in New York. New York में ये वाली हुई थी. This happens in Philadelphia. So it is also known as Philadelphia Congress. Right? What is a Congress? Certain set of people, they are meeting. Right? So in this First Continental Congress or Philadelphia Congress, again they meet, and what do they give? What is the result of this particular thing? The result is now they sort of reiterate the earlier demands, but they go a step further. In the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, तेजी से कैमरा इधर ले आओ, धीरे करने की जरूरत नहीं. In the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, what they had demanded, their demand was no taxation without representation. छोटी सी डिमांड थी. But now in the Philadelphia Congress, they demand the no taxation without representation, plus they demand something more. NTWR, that is repeal all taxes. तो ये तो previous demand है. अभी recently क्या हुआ है? Recently Massachusetts का self government ले लिया गया है. So therefore obviously इसी स्पेलिंग देख लेना है. मैसेच्यूसेट्स में भी कंफ्यूज ही रहता हूँ. Third aspect was very, very interesting. In the third aspect now, they brought about, they wanted to overturn the mercantilism of British in the 13 colonies. That means they now demanded that the 13 colonies, they should be allowed to trade. They should be allowed to trade with everyone at equal tariffs. That is, there should not be any preferential tariffs for the British goods which are coming into. What is mercantilism? Mercantilism ki, basically, philosophically what they are saying end mercantilism. Or what is this mercantilism? This is nothing but colonialism. It is a tool to economically exploit the colonies. And specifically what it mean? Specifically it would mean goods are coming into the colonies, the British goods, they are getting preferential tariffs. Preferential tariffs means on the French goods 30% duty, but on the British goods only 5% duty. So obviously the British goods, they are cheaper. Okay? And preferential tariffs for the British goods which are coming into entering 13 colonies. Second reason क्या आ जाता है? Second aspect क्या है mercantilism का? Can anyone tell me what was the second aspect of mercantilism? It is coercive acts or intolerable acts. वो zoom करके दिखा देंगे आपको. ठीक है, अभी साथ साथ लिखना नहीं है. Right now you presently try to understand. ठीक है, I'll give you time to write it down. The second aspect of mercantilism was that inside of the 13 colonies they were not allowed to set up iron and textile industry. Why? Because it was important for the British industrialization. Yes, very good. Great. Etc. etc. Meaning मर्केंटिलिज्म जो खत्म करना है वो कहां आप वहां से लेके आ सकते हो, हमने रीजंस में डिस्कस किया हुआ है, ठीक है। जस्ट एज एन एग्जांपल, 2 एग्जांपल मैंने बताए, आपको पता है, मैं जान के बड़ा खुश हूं, ठीक है, तो बड़ी अच्छी बात है। सो बेसिकली ये आ गया। सो बेसिकली दिस इज हाउ नाउ फ्रॉम द नो टैक्सेशन विदाउट रिप्रेजेंटेशन थ्रू द फर्स्ट कॉन्टिनेंटल कांग्रेस दे आर मूविंग टुवर्ड्स व्हाट, दे आर मूविंग टुवर्ड्स agitating against colonialism itself, right? And when they come out with this particular declaration, this declaration, it is considered by the British Crown as an act of revolt or as an act of sedition, and therefore as a result now the Britishers decide that we have to, अब चीजें बहुत ज्यादा आपे से बाहर हो गई, हम जितना कर सकते थे हमने कर दिया, सारे हमने टैक्सेस हटा दिए, बस एक टैक्स ऑन टी ही है, ठीक है। और उसके बाद अब ये लोग ये सारी डिमांड्स भी कर रहे हैं। दैट मीन्स द कॉलोनीज दे हैव गॉन इनटू अ रिबेलियन, एंड देयरफॉर नाउ द ब्रिटिश will attack the 13 colonies to militarily subjugate them, and this is how American War of Independence begins in 1775, 1776. The Britishers, they attacked the 13 colonies in 1775, and the 13 colonies, they gave declaration of independence in 1776. That is American War of Independence, 1776 to 83 begins. An intelligent student will be able to recognize that American Revolution, it is divided into 2 phases. In the second phase is the American War of Independence, whereas the first stage is the all of these things which are happening, that is focus on the abolishment of the taxes, that is anti-WR. So basically 2 phases are there. The first phase is anti-WR, the second phase is the actual war. So no taxation without representation, it is happening in the first phase. It is like the Gandhian phase, it is like the Shant wala phase, and then the actual war is happening because the Britishers have attacked. So American Revolution, it is from 1765 to 83, whereas American War of Independence 1776 to 83, 1775 to 83 भी बोल सकते हैं. Anti-WR is the first phase, this is the second phase. So therefore this is your 1776 onwards, this is your 1765 onwards. So therefore American Revolution, it happened in 2 phases. So this much it is there, this much you write down. If you have any doubts, you let me know, right? And so आप यहाँ तक दिखा दीजिए पहले, और उसके बाद उधर दिखाएं. I'll give you 3 minutes to write down, 1.5 minutes for this, 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes for this, and then rest. Right? So if there are any doubts, please send them across to the batch coordinators, so they will forward to me. Harsh, you would have to, I will not, I know the answer to this question, I know you have posted this question, but I would request you to please send the question to the batch coordinators. Otherwise, now after multiple petitions from my side, I would have to do Boston Tea Party on you, Harsh. एक काम करो, ये तो बड़ा लिखा हुआ है, इसको जूम कर दो, वैसे राइट करके जूम कर दो। नहीं my email ID is altruismheals, ALTRUI, this is I, altruismheals@gmail.com. ठीक है, so you can send your queries to me, I will respond, right? So that is there. Second, we have a question. Brahmanand Vikas is asking that the Navigation Act, it came in 1651, whereas the American Revolution, it is from 1765. So what is the relation? So point here to understand is, when we say American Revolution, that means revolution word comes from, you know, when do these people, they started sort of like revolting, or when the people started, you know, revolting, or when the changes started coming. So therefore revolution means huge amount of change in a very short amount of time. So therefore what is the change here? The change is independence of the 13 colonies. When it is beginning, the people for the first time are sort of like wanting this change, or they are fighting for this change beginning from 1765. But that does not mean that colonialism did not exist. So American Revolution was a revolt against colonialism of Britain, but and it began in 1765, the revolt. However, the colonialism, it existed pehle se na. So colonies were being established in your 1600s. Right? So therefore when the Navigation Act, it is there, so okay. So colonialism, it is existing, you know, since the time of establishment of the colonies in 1600s. After that, when the people start revolting against that colonialism, that is known as American Revolution, which happens in 1765. Right? So therefore this is what it is. Second aspect, general aspect मैं बता देता हूँ, इसीलिए मैंने in the first class I clearly mentioned, whenever I mention the word Americans, it means the European settlers. If I mention the word, if I talk about the original inhabitants, I will always use the word American Indians or Red Indians. So therefore the revolt, and look at it logically, why would the American Indians, that is the original inhabitants, they support the 13 colonies against the British? उनको क्या मिलेगा उससे? What will they get? The point is that at this point of time, that is after 1763, what will happen is, after 1763, the American Indians, they favor the British. Why do they favor the British? Because in 1763, Indian Reserve has been created. The Britishers, they have entered the same arrangement with the American Indians like the French. The area of the west of Appalachian Mountains, it was under the French, but French ने कहा था कि हम आपकी जमीन लूटने नहीं आएंगे, we will not come for your lands. Through the 1763 proclamation of the British Parliament, the Britishers are also saying the same thing, that okay, this Indian Reserve is for you and we will not take away your land. So therefore after 1763, there is an alliance between the American Indians and the Britishers. Whereas who is the enemy? Enemy for the American Indians are the 13 colonies, because उनका जमीन कौन लेना चाहता है? 13 colonies. Right? Before 1763, this assurance from the British was not there, that we will not expand beyond the Appalachian Mountains, will not take away our land. So therefore, before 1763, the American Indians, they were against the British as well as the 13 colonies. Right? So that's why. This part, ये वाला दिखा दो जरा थोड़ा सा, बच गया. Zoom in कर दो. ठीक है, तो you have written down the email. altruismheals@gmail.com. You can send your queries over there also. Okay. सो आप एक बार वो ऑन कर दीजिए प्रोजेक्टर. So let us have a look at the Declaration of Independence 1776. It is actually very simple. मतलब और भी points हैं इसमें, but the major aspects we have extracted, and the PPT will be available to you. तो ऐसा कुछ है नहीं उसमें. Do we have to read the content before 7-year war in Vision IS material? आपकी मर्जी है. मर्जी मतलब पढ़ लो एक बार. सिलेबस तो हमारा स्टार्ट हो रहा है फ्रॉम दी roughly from the middle of 18th century as per the syllabus. But before that, yes, do read it. It's good. Because then you will be able to have a better understanding of overall history. So before the content, before the American Revolution, before the 7-year war in the Vision IS, it talks about the whole history. It talks about the history since 1300s, since 1400s. Right? So therefore, yes, you should have a look at it. It will help you. Now, but strictly from the purposes of examination, it is not there. World history में से वैसे ही थोड़े से कम क्वेश्चन पूछे तो. Right. So American Revolution in action. So this is a Declaration of Independence, and what do they say? That all men are created equal. Okay, so they talk about equality. Second aspect is that they are endowed by their creation certain inalienable rights. Meaning, if a person is born, since God has created man, so just because they have been created, as a result, automatically there are certain rights which no one can take away. Therefore, in the second point, we are talking about fundamental rights. That they are endowed by their creation. Endowed mean उनको मिला कैसे? ठीक है? Abhishek, please send your query to the batch coordinator. We have to follow the discipline. Okay. So, second aspect is that they are endowed by their creation certain inalienable rights like right to life, liberty and pursuit of happiness. Right. So, we'll take a look at it. What are these rights? Third aspect is republicanism. What do you mean by republicanism? That is the head of the state should be directly elected by the people. It should not be a king. That is the meaning of republic. Lastly, independence. So they are saying that we are independent. The American colonies are oppressed by the British government, and these united colonies are and ought to be free and independent states. Right? So therefore these are the aspects. From where do these aspects they come into picture? These aspects they come into picture from the ideas of the Enlightenment thinkers. So what we are trying to say is that the Enlightenment thought process which happened in the 18th century, 17th century, 18th century. So therefore these were the ideas of modern polity. Right? And as per these ideas of the modern polity, what was being discussed, so basically ये एक पेज है, ये आपको मिल जाएगा. So कुछ नहीं है. For example, if you look at Locke, okay, so Locke was a thinker. What he is saying? He is saying that he had a positive view of man. What do you mean by positive view of man? He believed that we should give freedom to the people. We should give freedom to the masses. Right? And if masses are given freedom, then it is fine. So he was in favor of giving liberty to the people. Whereas there were other set of thinkers, for example like Hobbes, right? So Hobbes, he was not in favor of giving liberty to the people because he had a negative view of man. He said, Hobbes said that if we give huge amount of liberty to everyone, so there will not be any law and order. Right? And people, they need to be controlled, they need to be governed for ensuring order in the society. Whereas Locke, he had a positive view of man, and he said that no, we should give liberty to the people. How we should give liberty to the people? For example, we should have self-government. What is the meaning of self-government? What you today have in India, it is self-government. That is, people, they choose their own government. They choose their own representatives. People are allowed to self-govern. So this idea is in favor of democracy. This idea, it goes against autocratic rule, that kind of a system. Second is LLP, our natural rights. LLP kya hai? Right to life, liberty and property. Right? So the idea of fundamental rights was given by Locke. The idea of inalienable rights was given by Locke. That is, as soon as any person he is born, then there are certain natural rights which are there available with him. Right to life, right to liberty and right to property. Okay, so he is hinting at that there should be a concept of fundamental rights. Not by using the word fundamental, he is using the word natural. And lastly, purpose of government. What should be the goal of the government? Such a government which is created by the people, उसका goal क्या होना चाहिए? उसका goal होना चाहिए to protect these rights. Right? That is, the government का जो goal है, government का role है to ensure that people have right to life, people have right to liberty, people have right to property. And if the government does not follow this duty, then the people should have right to overthrow the government. That is known as right to insurrection. कि भैया हम अपनी गवर्नमेंट से खुश नहीं है, हम इसका तख्ता पलट कर रहे हैं. Right? And that is why today you know that in the US, right to bear arms is there. That is, if the government, it becomes atrocious, then the people of the US, they are endowed with this right that they can overthrow that government. That's why they have right to bear arms. Okay. Second is Hobbes. So Hobbes, he was pro-absolute monarchy. That means he had a negative view of man, and he said that the government, it should, that monarchy, it should be an absolute monarchy, right? That should be there. Second aspect is he also, but his positive contribution was that he gave the idea of social contract. Yeah, it was proposed by both. So Hobbes proposed the idea of the social contract. Priyanshi, please send your सबने किया है दिव्यांश, सबने बात करी है इस बारे में. ठीक है, हॉबी ने भी करी है, लॉके ने भी करी है, बाकी उन्होंने भी करी है. कॉन्सेप्ट धीरे धीरे बढ़ा है. अब ऐसा थोड़ी है दैट इफ आई हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट दैट मींस कि नो वन एल्स विल टॉक अबाउट इट, राइट? सो लॉके वाज आल्सो इन फेवर ऑफ द सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, बट व्हाट विल बी इन दैट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, राइट? ऑल दीस थिंग्स शुड बी इन दैट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट. Hobbes, he gave the idea of social contract. What do you mean by social contract? Social contract means that there is a contract between the people and the government, or the ruler and the ruled, right? And as per that contract, what will happen? The people, they will give up some of their liberties. Hobbes will say that they should give up a lot of their liberties, and they should give all the powers or most of the powers to the ruler, right? And in return, the ruler, he will ensure that there is provision of good economics, there is provision of law and order, or there is stability in the society, right? So that is a social contract. For example, in the case of India, what is the social contract between the people of India and the government? The Constitution of India, it serves as a social contract between the government and the people, right? So therefore, this idea, it was also a modern idea that there should be some obligations on the ruler. Okay, it should not be arbitrary rule, it should be as per some kind of a social contract. Locke was liberal, so he said that in that social contract there should be natural rights of right to life, liberty, property, and in that social contract it should be there that the purpose of the government is to protect these rights, and if the government does not fulfill the contract, then you overthrow the government, right? So therefore Locke inspired the American Revolution, the thought process of the American Revolution a lot. That's why in the Declaration of Independence they are talking about these right to life, liberty and property. But in the Declaration of Independence they replace the P with pursuit of happiness. What is the meaning of pursuit of happiness? Pursuit of happiness, it includes right to property, but it is more than that. How it is more than that? So pursuit of happiness, it means that property will play a very important role because every person or every man should have the right to amass property, he should have the right to build his property, to protect his property, he should be able to generate wealth in life, but sirf utna hi nahi hai, more. More means every person should have the right to strive for being something greater in life. If that comes with property, that is inclusive part of it, but sort of like a spiritual dimension, it is also added to it. But for all practical purposes, the pursuit of happiness, it is majorly about right to property. But yes, a little more, that's why, you know, they have brought in this component of happiness. ठीक है, हमारा पर इतना कोर डोमेन नहीं है ये फिलॉसफी वगैरह, इसलिए उस पे हम ज्यादा डिटेल में, उतना डिटेल में हम चर्चा नहीं कर रहे. ठीक है, यस, तन्वी पूछ लो, बैच कोऑर्डिनेटर से पूछ लो भाई. ठीक है, सो हो रहेगा. सो यस, दे कैन कम इन द रीजन पार्ट ऑल्सो. They can come in the reason part also, or if as per the question, if you want to talk about them in the impact part, or if you want to talk about them when you are discussing the Declaration of Independence, तब भी आप कर सकते हो, right? So yes, philosophically they guided or they were an inspiration for the American Revolution. So Tanvi is right.
Then around the time period of 1750, certain new ideas also started coming in, ideas of democratic self-government. Okay, so ideas of multi-party election, or at least people engaging in some kind of process so that they are able to elect their ruler. That is, idea of republicanism also came into picture, that king should not be the ruler. Now this was a new idea, that king should not be a ruler, but because before this everywhere the king was the ruler. Liberalism, it simply means fundamental rights, that is, everything is allowed until unless something is not barred by the law, right? So that is right to liberty. So therefore these ideas, liberalism, obviously it will go against colonialism, because in the colonialism a foreign set of people or a foreign country, they have subjugated you. So liberalism is obviously against colonialism, right? So that is there. Locke, Harrington, Minton believed in fundamental rights. Fine. Montesquieu in 1748 gave the idea of separation of power. So separation of power, which you study in your polity, so that is also part of the enlightened thought process, that judiciary, executive, etc., legislature, they should be separate. Thomas Paine, he was a French thinker. He called it absurd that an island can rule continent. Island was your England and continent is your America. They gave, so this is a mnemonic. Rihanna is pro-liberty. So ab idhar aa jao. Kya hai? So basically the enlightenment thinkers, they gave this mnemonic. Mnemonic to मैंने दिया है. They gave this concept. When we are saying Rihanna is pro-liberty, क्या मतलब है उसका? So basically they gave the concept of reason, right? Second, they gave the concept of happiness. Third, they gave the concept of nature, progress, and lastly, liberty. So basically I have made this mnemonic. Rihanna is pro-liberty. Okay, so this is just nothing but a, this is nothing but like a mnemonic. So what they are basically saying in the enlightened thought process, what they are saying is that reason, that is our primary focus should be reason. पहले actually क्या time था? पहले ये time था कि चर्च ने कह दिया कुछ भी, ठीक है, या फिर किसी राजा ने कुछ भी arbitrarily कह दिया, तो लगा नहीं, we will agree to anything only if you can support it with the help of reason and logic, right? Because whatever is logical is natural. So they said that like there are natural laws of physics, so there are some natural laws of economics also. So philosophically they are saying that man should be in synchronization with the nature, and whatever is natural is good, right? And how can you, so इसका समझने का तरीका पता है कैसा है? इसका समझने का तरीका ये है, ठीक है, ये तो है, समझने का तरीका कैसे? What they are saying? They are basically saying this. First thing they are saying, whatever is natural is good and it is the real truth. Second, what they are saying is, whatever is natural is good and the real truth. Second, they are saying like natural laws of physics, there are natural laws of politics and economics as well. Now the second aspect comes. Second aspect is what? How to find these natural laws of politics, how to find these natural laws of economics. Kaise? So what they are saying is that you can find it through reason, through logic and reason. Through logic and reason, one can find these, right? Next aspect they are saying is that if you are able to find it, by following the idea of logic and reason, then you will be able to achieve progress, you will be able to achieve happiness, and for allowing people to find this logic and reason, you need to give liberty, right? So there should be liberty to think logically, there should be liberty, etc. So basically, overall, क्या है? Overall यही है that if you do this, right? So therefore, yeah, simple. Okay, whatever is natural is good and real truth, like natural laws of physics, there are natural laws of politics and economics. Through logic and reason, one can find these. If above, then man will get progress. He will be free. He will be happy. And they basically said that what is the natural law of politics? The natural law of politics is all of these things which they are saying. They are natural laws of politics are democracy, self-government, separation of power, social contract, etc., etc. All of these things that they have said, that is the natural laws of politics. And what are the natural laws of economics? Free market economy or capitalism. Right. So therefore, this is how these people, these thinkers, they try to do this thing. Right. So इस तरीके से. So this much you can write down. I'll give you. Let us take a small 7 minutes break. Okay, इसको आप लिख लो. Let us take a small 7 minutes break. After that, we will come on to the impact of the American Revolution. So we are taking a 6 minutes break. After that, we'll meet again, and then we'll be completing this American Revolution and moving on to the French Revolution. Basically, in the Declaration of Independence, when these people, they are talking about Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. So therefore, we'll come to that particular aspect also, why they are created, why that equality is important, right? So when they are talking about equality, when they are saying that there are certain inalienable rights, so therefore, why they are talking about these inalienable rights, etc. So that is inspired by the Enlightenment thinkers. So just for the purposes of explanation of the slide, I mentioned this. Apart from this, the slide that is the Enlightenment thinkers के जो thoughts वगैरह थे वो आपको मिल जाएंगे. Obviously, it is not interesting. Even I do not find this Enlightenment thinkers etc. interesting. So we'll make the class interesting after the break. from old dogmas. Natural laws of economics will include capitalism. Dogmas is dhakosla. NL means natural laws. Afreen is asking, I request this question, that how to study notes and never refer the vision material at the same time, as in the effective way of studying while pursuing the material and the notes together. So basically I would request कि first of all you attend the class, and once you have got an introduction to that particular topic, once you have understood the class, after that you go back to those notes where you will find even further more elaboration. And then whatever class notes you have made, if you feel that certain points they should be added from the Vision IS notes into your notes, then you can note it down, right? So that is the best way to pursue. अब ये जो हिमांशु गुप्ता जी है, हिमांशु गुप्ता जी ने नेम से का भी लिहाज नहीं रखा. हिमांशु गुप्ता जी कह रहे हैं कि क्लास इज बोरिंग. ये तो क्लास इंटरेस्टिंग बनाते हैं, नाम की तो वो रख लेते हैं यार थोड़ी सी. कोई नहीं बेटा, वो इंटरेस्टिंग बनाएंगे. इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक आ रहे हैं, मुझे भी अच्छे लगते हैं फिलॉसफी वगैरह. आ जाओ, ठीक है. नाउ लेट अस कम टू, अरे ठीक है अजीत कर लेना इसको, कोई इशू नहीं है यार, ये इतना इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है, तभी मैंने उसको स्लाइड में पीपीटी में निपटा दिया. नाउ लेट अस कम टू द सेकंड एस्पेक्ट. सेकंड एस्पेक्ट इज व्हाट हैपेंड. सो बेसिकली वंस दिस वॉर टुक प्लेस, इन दिस वॉर द अमेरिकंस और द पीपल ऑफ द 13 कॉलोनीज, दे वर एबल टू डिफीट द ब्रिटिश आर्मी. Now you would ask how they were able to defeat the British army. They were able to defeat the British army. First of all, the 13 colonies, they had developed the military strength. When did they develop the military strength? The military strength had been developed during the 7-year war. See, the American continent, it is present here. So this is your American continent. Okay, this is your, and these are the 13 colonies. It is the Atlantic Ocean, which is there in the middle, and there it is your Great Britain, or there it is your England. Right? And this is your mainland Europe. Now when the war is being fought all across the Atlantic Ocean, and here the French are present, here the Spanish are present, in Florida also Spanish are present, in Central America also Spanish and the French are present, in South America also. So therefore at this point of time what happens is, to win the war, the Britishers, they recruit the people of the 13 colonies into an army. That is, the people of the 13 colonies, they become, an army it is raised. Within these 13 colonies, the people of the 13 colonies, that is the Europeans, they become part of an army. And the British forces, they have landed from Britain, and the people of the 13 colonies, they have joined the army. So collectively, they have defeated the French and the Spanish in the 7-year war. 7-year war from 1754 to 63. So therefore, the 13 colonies, they had been able to develop some kind of a militia, they had been able to develop some kind of a military during the 7-year war. So when in 1776 or 1775, when the American War of Independence began, so therefore these people, they had arms and ammunition, and they were also soldiers, and they had war experience also because of the 7-year war. That is point number 1. Second is, आपके जो स्पेन थे और फ्रांस थे, they got a great opportunity to get back at the British. In the 7-year war, the French and the Spanish, they had lost the control of the North America to the British. The British, they had become the effective controller of the whole of North America. Now when the 13 colonies, they are rebelling against the Britishers, then obviously the French and the Spanish, they get an opportunity to get back at the British. So therefore the French, they give money, the French, they give arms, and the Spanish also. So therefore, in this American War of Independence, the 13 colonies, they were supported by the French and the Spanish against the Britishers, right? And ultimately the Britishers, they lost. They lost because of this distance of the Atlantic Ocean. They lost because there was one small campaign from Canada. They tried to come and they tried to encircle the 13 colonies. That particular campaign failed. But the point here is, we are not preparing for the NDA. We are not preparing for the NDA. So therefore, we are not going to get into the battle history. We are not going to get into the battle history. From the perspective of the UPSC, it is enough to mention that because the 13 colonies, they had developed their own army, or they had developed their own militia during the 7-year war, plus because they were the locals, and the Britishers, they have to send their army across the Atlantic, plus because they had the support of the French and the Spanish. So therefore these people, they were able to win the war. So now we can write down the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies were able to defeat the British by 1783 because of following. The 13 colonies were able to defeat the British by 1783 because of following. The 13 colonies were able to defeat the British by 1783 because of following. The first point you can write down: the 13 colonies had developed their own militia during 7-year war, 1754 to 63. The 13 colonies had developed their own militia during 7-year war, 1754 to 63, with the help of British. The 13 colonies had developed their own militia during 7-year war, 1754 to 63, with the help of British. Second, the French and the Spanish supported the 13 colonies. The French and the Spanish supported the 13 colonies with money, arms, and men. The French and the Spanish supported the 13 colonies with money, arms and men to weaken the British, in American continent. The French and the Spanish supported the 13 colonies with money, arms and men to weaken the British in the American continent. Geographically, the war was difficult for British. Geographically, the war was difficult for the British. As 13 colonies were separated by the Atlantic Ocean. Geographically, the war was difficult or tough for the British because 13 colonies were separated by Atlantic Ocean. So automatically the 13 colonies, they will have an edge. भाई अगर ये ऐसा नहीं होता, then why in the 7-year war the Britishers would have raised army from the 13 colonies itself? Geography always plays a role, right? For example, when the US attacked Iraq, right? So therefore, to topple Saddam Hussein, so tanks, they were carried through ships, through aeroplanes. Huge amount of cost was incurred to fight a war, so far away from home. Huge amount of it was major learning exercise for the Americans while they attacked Iraq was the logistics. The major learning for the US was the logistics, and tomorrow it was like a practice. Tomorrow, if they want to fight a war, anywhere all across the world, they have that experience of Iraq. Now they were the world power, economically superior power, so therefore they were able to pull off the Iraq war. Otherwise, these are the issues. Next question comes into the mind that why do we call American Revolution the revolution, and why do we give so much of importance to the American Revolution? There has also been a question in the UPSC that American and the French Revolution, they laid the foundation of the modern world. So therefore, why this word? Not all events in the world history, they are labeled as revolution. And what is there in this American Revolution that we are still studying it? Right? So therefore, first of all, as an impact, what you can mention, you can say that the Treaty of Paris, after the war, Second Treaty of Paris, 1783 was signed. After the war, Second Treaty of Paris, 1783 was signed. After the war, Second Treaty of Paris, 1783 was signed. What happened here? So basically 3-4 components are here. First of all, what do the Americans get, or what do the 13 colonies get? Obviously the first point becomes of Second Treaty of Paris, 1783. What is the first point? What do the US get? They get independence. So therefore the 13 colonies, they are made independent. And the Britishers, they will give up all territorial claims, all kind of claims on the 13 colonies. So therefore they got independence. That is the first point. The second aspect comes, what did the Spanish get? So what the Spain supported. So what do they get? So they were able to get back Florida. Remember, so इतना छोटा सा point है, ज़्यादा important point नहीं है, but point क्या है? The Spanish, they got back Florida. Florida, it was lost by the Spanish during the 7-year war. Right? ठीक है, तो ये चीज इनको वापस मिल गया. Apart from this, what happened? Right? So these are the two important points. These are the two important points. Also, one small point is there. It was said that there will be perpetual peace. That is, perpetual peace between US and the British. They agreed that they will not fight again, although they did once fight again, but otherwise their relationship became a special relationship through this clause of perpetual peace. Right? And as a result we see there was birth of United States of America. ठीक है, एक छोटी सी वार हुई थी 1812 के आसपास में, but otherwise they have maintained this perpetual peace between British and the US, and this laid the second treaty of Paris 1783. It laid the foundation of special relationship between the Britain and the US. And you see that be it the First World War, be it the Second World War, be it the present, the Britain and the US, they have always maintained a special peace, a special relationship. Okay, around the time period of 1973, आपको मैं जनरल ज्ञान दे रहा हूँ. Around the time period of 1973, there was this question, that whether we should join the European Union or not. Right? European Union का नाम उससे पहले कुछ और था, but in essence it was European Union. Like today, there has been Brexit. And one of the reason for initially the Britishers not joining this all of these associations of which were related to European Union was that Britishers, they thought that if we become too closely connected with Europe, then it will hurt our special relationship with the US. If we have preferential tariffs for European countries, then how we will give preferential tariffs to the US? In the foreign policy, if we subjugate our foreign policy to the European Union, how we will follow independent foreign policy and have a special relationship with the US? So therefore, the special relationship of the British and the US, it goes back to 1783, right? So therefore, it is also a great diplomatic victory for the British that despite them fighting a war, they are able to maintain cordial relationships with the 13 colonies. It was also there. ये आपको मैं general ज्ञान दे रहा हूँ, ये लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है. It was also in 1947 that despite partition of India, the Britishers, they were able to maintain a special relationship with India. They were able to keep India and Pakistan both in the Commonwealth. If you read certain books of foreign policy, it is said, some people say that it is only, even today, it is only British who have the real knack for foreign policy and diplomacy. बाकी जो है वो तो ऐसे ही एंड ऐसे ही है, वो कर रहे हैं अपना काम. ठीक है. So anyways, so these are the broad points. These are two important points. They got independence and Spain got back Florida. What did France get? France got nothing. France did not benefit from it at all. Okay. So छोटे से points हैं, इनको लिख लो. उसके बाद we will move on to the American Revolution का part. That is why it is called American Revolution. So this is a question, why American Revolution is revolutionary, or it can be asked in different ways that it laid the foundation of the modern world, etc. etc. तो इसको आप लिख लो, उसके बाद हम इसको डिस्कस करते हैं. The Treaty of Paris of 1763, it was the first Treaty of Paris 1763. In the first Treaty of Paris of 1763, what is happening? There is no separate, the 13 colonies as such, on their own, they are not a party in the first Treaty of Paris of 1763. They are being represented by the British only. Why? Because they are the colonies of British. But in the second Treaty of Paris of 1783, the 13 colonies on their own are one of the party. Okay? Because they are now have got the independence. So that is the point of difference between the first Treaty of Paris and the second Treaty of Paris. The second Treaty of Paris 1783, it is responsible for the creation of the United States of America and for independence of the 13 colonies. The first Treaty of Paris of 1783, it is responsible for domination of the North America, domination of the Indian trade by the British. Okay, so therefore that is the concern there. Yes, it is usually said that the Britishers, they are better at diplomacy, right? Anyways, now let us right. So why American Revolution? It is revolutionary. Okay, इधर discuss कर लेते हैं. Why American Revolution? It is revolutionary. So अगर इसका first point अगर बात किया जाए, the first point was that it was revolutionary because it was radical in many ways. How it was radical in many ways? For example, ऐसा जिंदगी में पहली बार हुआ. It was for the first time in the history of the world that some country is declaring itself republic. Some country is saying we will not have a king. Everyone is like, what? You're not going to have a king? What system? What? We are going to be a republic. We are going to have self-government. We are going to have democracy. That kind of system existed nowhere in the world. That we are going to have a republic. Even in Britain, which was the first democracy, there also the British crown was there. Parliament was powerful. Parliament was supreme after 1688. But still, who is the representative of the British state? Who is the head of the state? The British crown. So therefore, it was very, very radical that a country will not have a king. This is the first radical idea, that we will be a republic and we will not have a monarchy. Okay, very, very radical. The second important aspect, जो Declaration of Independence में मैंने touch नहीं किया था, क्या नहीं touch किया था? All men are created equal. What is the utility of it? We will be able to much better understand it when we discuss the French Revolution. But to give you an idea, it was very, very radical. किस तरीके से बताते हैं, ठीक है? That is when we say, star mark करके लिख रहा हूं, all men are created equal. Now let us take a look at it. The meaning of all men are created equal is this. In that era, that is before your American Revolution, everywhere in the world, the people, they were divided into different structures. In the French Revolution, they call them the three estates. We will discuss the French Revolution. But the idea is that the world was divided, or the people, they were divided into three set of people or two set of people. Right? For example, there were ones who were the highborns, who were the elites, and the other ones, they were the Aam Aadmi Party, that is general. Meaning, to become a little more specific, the king, the nobility, and the clergy, they were the ones who had certain special privileges. They were the ones who had certain special privileges in front of the law. Different law will be there for the commoners, and different law will be there for the nobility, for the clergy, and king to king hai. So therefore, for the first time it was there. When you're saying equality, that all men are created equal, you're basically saying equality. Equality of what? So equality before law. Meaning, if today, before American Revolution, let's say, if a clergy, he commits a murder, or if a nobility, he commits a murder, he will be dealt with in a different manner as compared to a common man committing a murder. Right? So equality before law was not there in the world before American Revolution. And after American Revolution, it is coming. Where? It is coming in the 13 colonies. The second aspect is that equality of taxation. So like we'll study in the French Revolution, only the common man used to pay the taxes, whereas the nobility, the clergy, they will not be paying any taxes. Right? The common man is not represented in any power structure. कहीं कुछ democracy वगैरह कुछ नहीं है. So therefore, it was very, very radical when you're saying you're not going to have any nobility. मतलब इन 13 colonies में कोई noble नहीं होगा. और अगर कोई अपने नाम के सामने सर या कुछ इस टाइप का लगा भी रहा है तो उसके कोई स्पेशल प्रिविलेजेस नहीं होंगे. He will be same like a common man in front of the law. Same taxes are applicable. No special privileges to nobility. These people are savages. गंवार लोग हैं, कोई nobility नहीं. So very radical idea. Equality, very radical idea. Right? So therefore all men are created equal. What does it mean of the Declaration of Independence? It meant it was radical to not have special privileges for nobility. Radical to not have special privileges for this thing. Then right to property, it was also very, very radical. The idea of fundamental rights was also very, very radical, right? Because nowhere else the commoners or the common man was given rights. But American Revolution became the first revolution which implemented the ideas of the Enlightenment thinkers. So therefore one way we can say that it was radical because of the idea of the fundamental rights. idea of the fundamental rights. And how did this fundamental rights, it will come into picture. These fundamental rights, they came into picture, they came into implementation also. So around the time period of your 1800, around the time period of 1789, the US Constitution came into picture, right? After that, there were the series of first 10 amendments to the US Constitution. It is known as Bill of Rights. So those are the first 10 amendments. Those are that is the Bill of Rights passed in 1791, where the fundamental rights, they are brought into law, right? So therefore, it was very, very radical that common man, they will be having certain fundamental rights. This idea of fundamental rights, it was there in the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, it had come because of the inspiration from the Enlightenment thinkers. So therefore, this idea of fundamental rights was very, very radical, and this was there in Declaration of Independence, right? Plus, in 1791, Bill of Rights was passed. This Bill of Rights was it was clubbing of the first 10 amendments. Right? Clubbing of the first 10 amendments. Right? So therefore, this idea of fundamental rights was very, very radical. Can we talk about certain examples? Yes. For example, it was mentioned that right to property will be there until unless the law says that there can be deprivation of property, means no deprivation of property without due process of law. No deprivation of property without due process of law. Another example is there. For example, when you watch Netflix or when you watch Amazon Prime and you're watching a courtroom drama, so many of the time people say, I'm taking the fifth. I'm taking the fifth. When the lawyer asks some question from a witness, the witness says, I'm taking the fifth. And then this particular witness is free from not saying something. So what is that fifth? What is that fifth amendment? It basically says that no one should be forced or no one can be forced to give evidence against himself. Right? No one can be forced to give evidence against oneself. So these kind of things are there. No one can be forced to self-incriminate, means to give evidence against oneself, right? So therefore, in this sense, it was very, very radical, these ideas of fundamental rights. Apart from this, since we have mentioned the constitution, so D point we can mention that it was the first written constitution of the world. First written constitution of a whole country. Because earlier there had been some examples where, for example, a city might decide that we have a written constitution. But at a country level, it was the first country to have a fully written constitution. So that idea, so that's how it is also, that is also like one of the highlight of the American Revolution. So point number 2 we can say. But to be technically correct, we should write first fully written, because there had been partially written constitutions earlier. First fully written constitution. For a whole country, because earlier in the history there have been examples where, let's say, a city has decided that we will have a written constitution. There have been examples where there have been partially written constitution. So to be technically correct, it is right to say that it was the first fully written constitution for a whole country, right? So in this sense also, it was also very, very radical. It was very, very radical. So therefore, in this sense, it was very, very radical. Plus, third point in general we can mention, the United States of America or the US, it became the first country to bring into practice the thoughts of the Enlightenment thinkers. before this, Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, they had talked about the separation of power, they had talked about democratic self-government, they have talked about republicanism, but which country is the one country which is bringing it into application properly, so in a much more, stronger manner. Yes, democracy is there in your England, but still, in the form of a written constitution guaranteeing all of these rights, having a republic, self-government, etc. So therefore, in this sense, we can say that it implemented the Enlightenment thoughts, or it implemented the ideas given by the Enlightenment thinkers. So they are implementing through the constitution. तो इसको हम ऐसे लिख सकते हैं. First fully written constitution for a whole country plus implemented the ideas of given by the Enlightenment thinkers. Right? So therefore this is what we can mention. Another aspect which comes into picture on the importance of the American Revolution is, if we talk about point number 3, is that it inspired the French Revolution. It inspired the French Revolution. How did it inspire the French Revolution? So the ideas of the American Revolution, they traveled across the Atlantic, right, and they impacted the French people. Many of the Enlightenment thinkers, they were on the European mainland also. So what has happened is, the ideas of the Enlightenment thinkers from the European mainland, they had traveled across the Atlantic, influenced the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies implement those ideas, that further inspires these ideas that again travel back, that see, they can be implemented. Success is possible in implementation of Enlightenment ideas. This impacts the French, and they conduct the French Revolution 1789. Specifically, we will take a look, that is the success of American Revolution inspired the French Revolution. Inspired the French Revolution. Also, some other roles were also played, right? So therefore, we will take a look at it when we discuss the French Revolution. That is, how did the American Revolution exactly influence the French Revolution? या फिर यहाँ पे भी discuss कर सकते हैं. Success of the American Revolution inspired the French Revolution. How? Plus, ठीक है, मतलब एक तो ये जनरल हो गया. दूसरा, फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन का एक्चुअली आपको वर्बली समझा देता हूं, लिखेंगे फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन में ही. The people of France at that point of time, they were under a lot of economic stress. In 1788, 1789, they have been under a lot of economic stress, right? We will discuss all of it. But the point here is that the people of France, they thought that the French government has supported the 13 colonies which are fighting for no taxation without representation, whereas in our own country we do not have this principle implemented of no taxation without representation, because we are not represented in the parliament in any way, right? So therefore they saw the irony that our government is ready to fight for the rights of foreigners, right? But the same things, they are not made available to us. More on this it will come when we discuss the French Revolution next, right? So I just wanted to give you an idea that how did the inspiration come. So in this sense it was very, very radical. In this sense it was very, very radical. But there can be a question, was American Revolution truly revolutionary? It was not truly revolutionary. Or what were the negatives of the American Revolution? और उनको भी समझने का तरीका बड़ा आसान है, right? So negatives of American Revolution. So इसको याद करने का तरीका बड़ा आसान है. कैसे? When we say all men are created equal, okay? When we say that all men are created equal, there is a problem. What is the problem? First problem. These men are men. They are not women. Meaning, right to vote was not made available to the women, right? And therefore, the women, they did not benefit. So until your 1920, the women, they did not get a right to vote. They did not get right to vote. They had to fight a long, political battle to get the right to vote. Right? Second aspect, these men, they were men of property. Meaning, if you are a person who is not having a property, if you are a person who is not an owner of any particular land, then you do not have a right to vote. The guarantees, the fundamental rights of the constitution, they are not available to you then. You do not have any participation in this self-government thing which you have created. So therefore the property, only the propertied class, they got the right to vote. That is, only these men, they were propertied men. And men who did not have property, they did not get the right to vote. Non-propertied class did not get the right to vote until your 1856. That means there was a property criteria. You are eligible voter only if you have this much amount of property. So therefore these men are men, they are not women, and these men are propertied men, not the non-propertied men. Then third point, these men were white men. They were neither black nor they did look like the original American Indians. So therefore these men, they were not black men, they were not the American men, original American Indians, they were only white men. So only white men, they got the right to vote. Blacks did not get right to vote. American Indians did not get right to vote. Right? And right to vote कब मिलेगा? तब मिलेगा ना when they are citizen. Right? So these men, how to remember this? These men, they were men, they were not women. These men who benefited from the American Revolution, they were the propertied men. These men, they looked white, they were neither black nor they were American Indians. So therefore this is how the American Revolution, it was not revolutionary, and therefore all of these things, they are taking place. Right? So therefore blacks, they did not get citizenship. Blacks और इनका हम अलग से लिख लेंगे. So this much you write down. After that we will. Emancipation means you are emancipated. कैसे बताऊं? Dictionary search करो यार. ठीक है. So write this down. And after that we'll clear the board and we'll take a brief look at the further progress that will take place on the constitutional front, and then we'll begin with the French Revolution. But not just the universal written franchise, they are also not getting the citizenship. Also, slavery is also not ended. So therefore, slavery, it is continuing. So this another additional point you can mention, that slavery, it continued. Until 1865, slavery continued. So basically the people from Africa which have been hunted by the slave traders, and they are brought to the Americas, that is Central America, North America, right? So therefore they continue to be slaves, they are not given freedom. लेफ्ट वाला दिखा दिया? पहले लेफ्ट वाला लिखा हो ना जो लिखा हुआ है. Last point before slavery is blacks, they did not get citizenship. American Indians, they did not get citizenship. Write कर दीजिए. Thomas Jefferson himself had, who is usually considered pro-blacks, he himself had slaves. Obviously, blacks and Native Americans are different. Search for Native American and go to images on Google and search for black and go to Google. You'll find the difference. Third point of negatives. So the third point of negative, this is the first point, this is the second point, this is the third point. They did not get, the blacks, they were slaves and therefore they were not given the citizenship. Similarly, American Indians का तो अब हत्या होगी अच्छे तरीके से, ठीक है, उसी को कंटिन्यू करेंगे, ठीक है. सो दिस आर नेगेटिव्स में कंटिन्यू होगा अभी. ये तो हमने कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल एस्पेक्ट्स देखे हैं. नाउ व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, वी आर कंटिन्यूइंग द नेगेटिव्स, ठीक है. सो पॉइंट नंबर 3 हो गया वहां पे, 1 2 3, ठीक है, इसी में कंटिन्यू कर लेते हैं. सो नाउ व्हाट विल हैपन, नाउ आफ्टर द अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन, अब अमेरिकन क्या करेंगे? The people of the 13 colonies, now they will expand beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And therefore these people, they will take over the lands of the original inhabitants, that is the American Indians. They will murder them, they will butcher them, they will take away their property. So therefore what do we see? That right to property is available only to white men. What about the right to property of the original American Indians? उनका तो जमीन अब आप छीनने जा रहे हो, and brutally. So therefore this right to property was limited only to the people of the 13 colonies. So therefore where is this equality? All men are created equal. काय की equality? नहीं है equality, right? So therefore so what do we see? So the point here is this. So this particular aspect that full board यार, full board दिखा दिया था, अब तो मिटा दिया मैंने, ठीक है. So basically what we are saying is that the simply we can mention that the expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains So therefore the 13 colonies expanded to today's United States of America after the American Revolution. So it is a great thing for the people of the 13 colonies, they are getting access to the more and more land, but it is a very bad thing for the American Indians. So therefore आपके American Indians का तो भट्टा बैठ गया अच्छे तरीके से, ठीक है. So this is what is happening. Plus slavery, it is continuing, right? Slavery continued. So therefore this is the second point that we mentioned, that slavery continued. तो the topic of slavery ये थोड़ा सा डिस्कस करना है क्या है इसके अंदर. So slavery. So topic of slavery specifically we discuss when we go into imperialism, colonialism, but for the brief purposes let me tell you that around the time period of 1453, after your 1453, gradually these new lands they were discovered. इसको story की तरह सुन लो. In 1492 Columbus he discovered Central America, right? And when he discovered Central America, उसको लगा Indians मिल गए, तो उसने कहा अच्छा Indians हैं, ठीक है, but later on, that's why the American Indians, they are known as American Indians, because Columbus was out there to search for India, right? 1498 Vasco da Gama, he discovered India, a route to India through the Cape of Good Hope. And after that what began is, after that began the plantation system, especially in the case of America, the plantation system. And in the plantation system, what was there? In the plantation system, the climate was very, very humid. It was very hot and humid. And therefore, these Europeans, they needed labor for these plantations which are there in Central America, which are also there in South America, which are also there in south of North America. Okay? So plantation systems are going on, they need labor. From where do they get labor? These merchants and later slave trading companies, they go to the coastal part of West Africa, and from there they either buy or kidnap the blacks, and then they transport these blacks across the Atlantic Ocean into the plantations, and there these are sold and purchased. What is the difference between a slave and let's say a serf? Okay, we'll get to the serf when we discuss the French Revolution. Slave is like a property. For example, today I bought a car. अब मेरा दिमाग खराब हो गया, मैंने बेसबॉल का बैट लेके वो कार तोड़ दी अच्छे तरीके से. I bought a car, I smashed it like anything. My property is there. I do whatever is my property. Who are you to tell me? So therefore, when men become commodity, children, women, they become commodity and they are purchased and sold. So therefore, now you can do anything with them. You want to rape them, rape them. You want to kill them, kill them. Who is stopping you? You want to make them work 24 hours a day, make them work 24 hours a day. So therefore, this is slavery. And these blacks, they were brought into all across, in Europe, in all the Americas, these blacks, they were brought in for this labor. Now, the situation of America was that in America, if we look at America, then America, it is North America, that is your United States of America. If you look at the US, if this is your US, then roughly we can say that these are the northern states, or this is your north, and these are your southern states of the USA. Now the situation is that the south, it was dependent more on agriculture, and over a period of time, the north, because a very good thing also will happen after this thing is that gradually industrialization will also begin. So the point here is that over a period of time after 1783 and even before that, this north was more industrial. This north, it was more industrial. Some factories will set up, proper industrialization will begin after 1865, that is after the US Civil War. But over a period of time we are saying that this north, it was more industrial, and this south, it was more agricultural. Their economy was more agriculture dominated. As a result, this southern states of the US, they were more dependent on the slave labor. And therefore the southern states of the US, they did not want end of slavery. They did not want end of slavery. Slave trade was very, very important for them because they had huge farms, right? Their economy was largely agrarian, and they required these slaves for labor on these farms. Plus many of the southerners, they were running slave trading companies also, so therefore their economy, the economy of the south, it depended on the slaves. Right? Why? Because the slaves, they provided labor. They provided labor, right? Especially to work in the farms. Now what happened is that Abraham Lincoln, around the time period of it, we know that this is the reason, because it is economic reason plus racism is there. So therefore that is why after the American Revolution, the blacks, they are not given citizenship. The slavery, it continues. It is a negative of the American Revolution. Around the time period of 1861, Abraham Lincoln, 1860s, he's of the intent that slavery needs to be banned. That slavery needs to be banned, otherwise it will lead to unrest, etc., etc., a lot of things, right? Because a huge amount of black population had been imported into the US, and therefore Abraham Lincoln was of the view that slavery needs to be banned, right? When he banned slavery, at that point of time, the southern states, they rebelled, and then they say Azadi. That means that is the point of difference between India and the US. Politically, what is the difference between India and the US? In your polity, you would have studied that India is a union, indestructible union of destructible states. Whereas in case of US, what do we learn? We learn that US is a indestructible union of indestructible states. Meaning, what is the point of difference? The point of difference is when India got independence, the Britishers, they gave independence to a union. So therefore what came into existence first? A union, right? States are part of it. But in the case of US, who is getting independence? Can anyone tell me who is getting independence in the case of US? Slaves were brought only from Africa. They were brought from other areas also, but majorly from Africa, because the Africans, they were accustomed to, hot and humid kind of a climate, right? Plus physically they were also strong. So because of the climatic conditions. Slavery India में उतनी ज़्यादा नहीं थी. India में see the Britishers, some slavery was there, Arab traders etc. करते थे, but उतनी ज़्यादा India में slavery नहीं थी. India में bonded labor थी, right? So Indians, they were sent to South Africa, for example, to Fiji etc. as bonded laborers, not as slaves, not purchased and sold. Quantum उतना नहीं था. What is the difference between yes, 13 regions. So therefore, in the case of US, it is the 13 entities are becoming independent. In the case of India, only India is becoming independent, right? Because power transfer, it happens from the Britishers to Indian Union. Whereas in the case of US, the 13 colonies, they are getting independent, and then they are deciding that we are going to be united. So they have voluntarily come together to form United States of America, and that is why legally it is possible, or technically it is possible in certain special circumstances, that if I want to get out of that union, I can get out of that union, and that is what these southern states they did now, right? So therefore the southern states, when Abraham Lincoln, he tried to declare slavery as illegal, or he tried to remove slavery, so therefore at this point of time the southern states, they declared independence, right? And they said that we are going to have our own country, our own confederation. We do not want such, interference by the union government. So the southern states, they did not want a strong union government, strong central government. Plus they were against this ban on slavery. So therefore these people, they declared independence. This led to a US civil war, and this civil war, it was fought obviously between the Union. On one side you have the Union versus the South, or versus the southern states, right? The southern states. So therefore 1861 to 65, for a period of 4 years, these people, they fought among each other, right? They fought among each other, and what is the demands of the southern states? A, they do not want this banning of slavery, plus additional demand was also there. The south, or the southern states, they wanted a weaker union government. Weak central government, or so that is also one of the reasons. They did not want a strong central government. Why? Because if the center is strong, then the states, they will be weak, right? So therefore, as a result, this war happened for a period of 4 to 5 years. Finally, the Union government, it won, and once it won, after that the slavery was banned by the 13th Amendment, right? So therefore, if we look at this particular thing, then the idea is simple. 13th Amendment, it ended slavery, right? 13th Amendment, it ended slavery. After that came 14th Amendment, right? 14th Amendment, it gave citizenship to the blacks. After that came 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment, it gave voting rights to the blacks. Then came your right to vote to women. It happened in 1920, and around the time of 1924, the Native Americans, they got citizenship and right to vote. Right? So therefore there were certain anomalies in the US Constitution, and as a result of this we see that this 13th amendment, it is coming specifically in 1865. Right? So 13th amendment, it is coming in 1865. Years are not important, इसलिए मैंने लिखे नहीं. 14th amendment 1868, but एक era हमें idea लग जाए. 15th amendment, it is coming in 1870. Right? So therefore this is how your things are going. So therefore, but in reality the discrimination, it has continued. Changes in the, what actually happened is that at the central level the constitution was changed. But the state government थी, implement तो वो करेंगे ना. Because in US there is federalism. So in many of the areas they are under the state governments. So until unless the state governments, they pass a law bringing this particular feature of the constitution into effect. So therefore, plus socially the discrimination, it has continued. Yes, Manu, yes. So the southerners, they are this kind of thing. So therefore isko aap likh lijiye. So these are the aspects. And with respect to the industrial revolution, so what do we know? Till the time period of 1783, the US, it was busy in the civil, first of all in the 7-year war from 1754 to 63. After that the US got busy in the American Revolution from 1765 to 1783. After 1783, the US, it was busy in territorial expansion, that is taking away the lands of the Native Americans. Then around 1861, they got busy in this civil war. So therefore, properly, factories were being set up, roadways were being set up, things were happening. But properly, industrial revolution or industrialization of US, it began after 1865. Okay, so in general, matlab this, so this is there. One simple point you can mention that या फिर इसको इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन में लिख लेंगे, कोई इशू नहीं है. यहाँ पे लिख दिए post 1865 proper industrialization began. When we'll be discussing industrial revolution, we'll again take it up. Right? Why did it not happen before 1865? So period of turmoil is there from 1754 till your 1865. Some things are happening. Right? So therefore this is how your things are progressing. This you can note down. अब सबसे पहले ये दिखा दीजिएगा राइट वाला, क्योंकि सबसे पहले हमने ये लिखा था. ठीक है, या आप 15 सेकंड 20 सेकंड के लिए दिखा दीजिए. Okay, so some people are, some students, they are mentioning, they are talking about slavery. So see, when you read modern Indian history books, etc., I'm just giving you a hint. So therefore, within India as such, slavery did not exist, right? So some of the people, they can say that the caste system, it is sort of like a slavery. So within India, the slavery did not exist, right? The Britishers, they interpreted some of the customary, for example, they would, as part of the traditional customs, some of the families who would be dependent on a, let's say, a zamindar, they will be providing them free labor. So the Britishers, they considered it as slavery. But as per the Indian context, it was not slavery, as such. Okay, so purchase and sale of slaves was not happening inside of India. When we look at outside of India, so as such, no major quantum of slaves were traded from India to the rest of the world. What actually happened in a bigger quantum was on a contract, Indian labor was taken to the other British colonies, for example to South Africa, to Fiji, right, etc., etc. And there the issue of the bonded labor emerges when we discuss, let's say, Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa. So there we discuss about them. Okay. So Florida and Florida, it was actually purchased by the US, right? So Louisiana, it was purchased from France in 1803. Florida was purchased, पैसा देके खरीदा था 1819 में, 1819, अब इधर कर दीजिए, ठीक है, ये तो लिख ही लिया था मेरे ख्याल से, ये वाला पार्ट कर दिया, ठीक है. The United States of America came into existence after the Second Treaty of Paris 1783. The 13 colonies, they got independence, and after that the 13 colonies, they came together, and the representatives from those colonies, they framed the Constitution of the United States of America. That Constitution came into existence in 1789, and this is how your United States of America came into existence in the form of those 13 colonies. After that, territorial expansion of these 13 colonies happened. By using their military, they captured the lands of the Native Americans, and they also purchased some area. For example, they purchased Florida from Spain. They also purchased Louisiana from France at different point of time in 1800s, and this is how the modern US came into existence. 1865 is 13th Amendment, 1-3. वो 7 जैसा दिख रहा है, it is 13th Amendment. एक बार लिख लो तो बता देना मेरे को यहां पे. Okay. Yes, the blacks, they got the citizenship and the voting rights before the Native Americans, right? Because there is animosity, there is warring between the Native Americans and the people of the 13 colonies. Continuous wars are taking place because they are taking away their lands, right? So the Native Americans, they do not have modern army. A lot of them, they get killed during this process of territorial expansion which is happening, right? So Canada, it was already separate. It was already separate through the Treaty of Paris of 1763. The Britishers, they had captured Canada. In the Second Treaty of Paris of 1783, we see that the 13 colonies are getting independence. The Britishers are happy that they are able to maintain Canada as a separate entity. And by having Canada as a separate entity, the Britishers are able to have a foot in the North America. Okay. There was one small question. There was one small question. What was the role of the American Indians? Obviously, the American Indians, they would support the Britishers, right? They would not want the 13 colonies to get independence, because after that, their protector at present is the British. So therefore, they would oppose the original American Indians. They will oppose the American Revolution, because that American Revolution will make the 13 colonies independent, and then these 13 colonies, they will come for the lands of the American Indians to violate, by violating the proclamation of 1763. Okay. Any doubt so far? थोड़ा बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग हुआ पहले से? यार देखो, जरूरी नहीं है आपको मेरी क्लास इंटरेस्टिंग है और मुझे कुछ बुरा लगा. हिमांशु, आई डिड नॉट फील बैड एट ऑल. कुछ है ही नहीं बुरा लगने वाला, उसमें क्या हो गया? जरूरी थोड़े देखो, टीचिंग स्टाइल एंड लर्निंग स्टाइल, इफ दे मैच, देन द क्लास बिकम्स इंटरेस्टिंग फॉर द स्टूडेंट, यू नो. सो बेसिकली उसमें कोई प्रॉब्लम ही नहीं है. बट माई एंडेवर विल बी दैट आई एम एबल टू मेक यू अंडरस्टैंड, इवन इफ यू आर फीलिंग इट बोरिंग, बट इफ यू आर एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड द कॉन्सेप्ट्स, आई एम हैप्पी. If I am explaining you something and it is becoming complex, then irrespective of the fact that you find me interesting or not interesting, वो आपका नुकसान है, ठीक है? तो वो बस मैं नहीं चाहता हूं. So what I want is that you are able to understand. and obviously I would want the class to be interesting for you, right? So, but I hope you are able to understand. Understanding is my primary goal, and I'm writing on the board so that you are able to get something out of it. ठीक है, ताकि मतलब ऐसा ना हो कि एक मोनोलॉग हो गया, क्लास बीत गई और उसके बाद आपके पास कुछ नहीं है. ठीक है, सो बहुत बार ऐसा होता था जब हम कोचिंग करते थे. कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है उसमें, मतलब बिल्कुल बुरा मत मानो हिमांशु, ठीक है, और कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. मैं यार आई ट्रीट यू लाइक एज अ फ्रेंड. तो मेरे को कोई भी बुरा नहीं लगा, आप खुल के लिखो, कोई दिक्कत ही नहीं है. क्यों, देखो सिंपल सी पॉइंट है कि मैं आई हैव टू गिव माय बेस्ट, तो जितना बेस्ट दूंगा, ठीक है, उतना अच्छा आप मेरे को बल्कि मोटिवेट करते हो कि और इंटरेस्टिंग बनाओ और कुछ करो. तो अब आ जाते हैं फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन पे. फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन 1789. Now, to understand French Revolution of 1789, we have to first understand the internal domain of France. That is, we have to understand the society of France. तो पहले एक थोड़ा सा verbally समझ लेते हैं, ठीक है. तो अभी आपको you don't have to write anything, you just have to listen to me. The French society in 1789, one student had asked one thing. Student had asked one particular point that, sir, do we need to read about the content which is there before the 7-year war in the Vision IS notes? So actually, in that area, what we discuss is the society as it existed around the time of 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. How did the trade began? How did capitalism come into existence? अच्छा, इससे एक और बात याद आई. बच्चों का स्टूडेंट डाउट अगर मेरे को पता आ जाए, प्लीज क्विक रिव्यू ऑफ टॉपिक कवर टिल नाउ एट द एंड ऑफ द लेक्चर इज पॉसिबल. यू हैव, ठीक है, तो वो करते हैं यार, ठीक है, कोशिश करेंगे उसकी, ठीक है, पूरे उसका हम वो बार बार रिव्यू करेंगे. मतलब एक चीज, मतलब जो वो आपका इंटरलिंकिंग हमेशा चलेगा. सो इट इज नॉट दैट वी हैव डन द अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन, आफ्टर दिस विल नॉट बी टेकिंग द नेम ऑफ अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन एवर. वैसा नहीं करने वाले, ठीक है. हमारा इंटरलिंकिंग हमेशा रहेगा. क्या बात कर रहे थे हम बात कर रहे थे हाँ, एक बच्चे ने डाउट पूछा था. क्या पूछा था वो बताता हूं आपको, बिकॉज इट इज रिलेटेड टू दिस पर्टिकुलर पार्ट. बच्चे ने डाउट पूछा था. इट इज नॉट रिलेटेड टू फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन बट इंडिपेंडेंट है. What is mercantilism versus capitalism? Mercantilism versus capitalism. See, mercantilism, what does it mean? It is coming from the word mercantile. Mercantilism, mercantile. Okay. So this is what? This is equal to mercantile capitalism. While this is capitalism. When we say mercantile capitalism, what does it mean? It basically means capitalism signifies profit motive. So when any endeavor is made to generate profits, that is capitalism. बहुत सारी चीजें उससे connected है. But when you are generating profits through trade, then you are calling it mercantile capitalism. So basically, all the things which are associated with generation of profits through trade. And what is trade? Trade is import, export. Trade is also domestic trade. Right? So therefore, all things which are associated to generation of profits via trade, it is mercantile capitalism. So therefore, every importer and exporter, he is a capitalist, right? Even today, the importer and exporter of India, they are a capitalist. But specifically, what kind of capitalist are they? I will say specifically they are mercantile capitalists. Why? Because their profit generation, it is coming through the activity of trade. So they are engaged in mercantile capitalism or they are engaged in mercantilism. But even a country in foreign policy can engage in this form of capitalism because if they want to generate profits for their own country, right, at a country level. That's why we said that the Britishers, they followed a policy of mercantilism. The British state, it followed a policy of mercantilism. Now, an importer or exporter, what he can do? He can find some tricks. He can find shortest routes to reach America. He can find ways to procure goods in Britain, at a faster pace. He can procure best ships That is all what he can do to maximize his profits. But see what Britain can do. Britain is a country, and as a country they have legislative power over the 13 colonies. So therefore, to maximize profits of Britain, the British government or the British Parliament or the British state, it abused the legislative power to maximize profits of Britain as a country. So at an individual level also mercantile capitalism operates, and at a country level also mercantile capitalism operates. Okay? Now when we talk about capitalism, it is a whole philosophy. It is a whole philosophy, means free market economy, etc., etc. A lot of things come. But broadly, जिस structure में हम बात कर रहे हैं, so it can be of two types. Capitalism can be of two types. For example, one is your mercantile capitalism. One is your mercantile capitalism, and second, it can be industrial capitalism. Obviously, in the era of agriculture, in the domain of agriculture, you can talk about agrarian capitalism, कोई problem नहीं है. But usually, mercantile capitalism के अलावा जो popular word use में आता है वो industrial capitalism. Like Karl Marx, he criticized industrial capitalism. So what is industrial capitalism? All things associated to generation of profits via manufacture of goods. Right? So therefore, here profit motive is there, but here activities are what? Do, मतलब ये सारा as it is, ठीक है, via factory manufacture or via manufacturing. That is, when you are converting certain raw materials, you are changing certain raw materials to finished goods, and there lies your profit. In the MRP of the finished good, there lies your profit. So therefore, when you are doing this through manufacturing, that is industrial capitalism. So basically what happened is, the world shifted before 1750. Before 1750, what dominated? Mercantile capitalism. We are talking about domination. Why? Because is industry not there? Yes, industry is there, but handicraft industry is there. Right? So manufacturing is taking place before 1750, but through hands, through tools, through hathoda, something like that. After 1750, when your industrial revolution takes place, then the world shifts towards what? It shifts towards IC, it dominates. So, did mercantile capitalism end? Nahi bhaiya. Once China is producing the goods in its factories, after that the traders of China, they are exporting it to the rest of the world to earn profits. So both exist. Mercantile capitalism also exists today, industrial capitalism also exists. Just that profits, more profits, where lies the real center, real power, after 1750, after the advent of machines in the industry, before the advent of the machines in the trading. That's why before 1750, what do we discuss? We discuss trade, slave trade. In your modern Indian history, what also you discussed? The Britishers, they were interested in getting the finished cotton of India, in getting the spices of Indonesia, of India, in getting the tea of China. That is what you discussed, trade. But once industrialization takes place, after that, within the drain theory in the modern Indian history, you talk about this particular aspect. After 1750, we discuss that the drain increased, if you have done your modern Indian history, right? Yeah, Sumit, इस टाइप की जो चीजें हैं, when did the US got Alaska, ये Google वगैरह पे सर्च कर लो, strategically इतनी important नहीं है, right? So therefore इस टॉपिक पे फोकस करो, भी अलास्का कहाँ पहुंच गए आप, ठीक है? So mercantilism versus capitalism, this is a basic idea. So ये आप नोट डाउन कर लो, अच्छा क्वेश्चन था. So usually इस क्वेश्चन को हम बाद में डिस्कस करते हैं when we discuss industrial revolution, but हाँ वो भी टॉपिक जल्दी आने वाला है, तो इसको इतने को आप नोट डाउन कर लो. Since mercantilism is a word which we used in the American Revolution, that's why I discussed it. So you write this down. After that, we'll continue with the French Revolution. Please write this down. ब्रेक चाहिए आपको? चलो लेट्स टेक अ स्मॉल ब्रेक, बट ज्यादा नहीं हो पाएगा, ठीक है. लेट्स टेक अ स्मॉल ब्रेक ऑफ कितना? लेट्स टेक अ स्मॉल ब्रेक ऑफ 4 मिनट्स, 4 मिनट का ले लेते हैं और 5 मिनट में स्टार्ट कर देंगे. ज्यादा लंबा नहीं, पर 4 मिनट्स का ही. What have I written after RM? Finish good. Raw material into finish good. देखो over a period of time, ठीक है, वो सिंक्रोनाइजेशन आ जाएगा. मैं बार बार बोलता भी रहता हूं, बट अच्छा है आप पूछो. ठीक है, पूरा रॉ मटेरियल, पूरा फिनिश गुड वगैरह लिखूंगा तो मतलब वो टाइम ज्यादा लग जाएगा. तो रॉ मटेरियल, अपन नोट्स हमेशा ऐसे ही बनते हैं. रॉ मटेरियल फिनिश गुड, ठीक है, RMFG बार बार यूज करेंगे इसको, ऐसा नहीं कि अभी की बार यूज किया. ठीक है, तो रॉ मटेरियल फिनिश गुड. IC इज इंडस्ट्रियल कैपिटलिज्म. अच्छा चलो कंटिन्यू कर लेते हैं, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं मुझे. ठीक है, चलो. सो दिस इज योर. अब आते हैं फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन पे. बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है. ओके 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 कर रहा हूं. ठीक है. सो देयरफॉर नाउ लेट अस डिस्कस. देखो, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, टू अंडरस्टैंड द फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन we need to know what was French Revolution. We will follow the same scheme of thing, that when we discuss event, what was the event, why it happened, why are we studying it, what is its importance, how did it change the world, if we categorize like it. So therefore, what is the first category? When we discuss what was the French Revolution. So when we discuss what was the French Revolution, so in the, abhi aapko sunna hai bas, you just have to listen. In the French Revolution, what happened is that the people of France, that is the French, they rose against their government, they rose against the nobility, the clergy and the king. Three entities: nobility, clergy and the king. We will explain it why we are talking about them separately. So the people of France, they rose against their government and they overthrew the king, right? And they established democracy. That is why it is known as a revolution. But that is a political component of the French Revolution. The French Revolution, it also has a social component. American Revolution also had a social component. When they mentioned all men are created equal, then we are talking about society. Okay. Similarly, in the case of France also, the political component was change in power, that is overthrow of the monarchy and establishment of a republic in 1792. In 1789, monarchy was not overthrown, but Britain-like system was brought in. That is, there will be a constitution and monarchy will be there, but it will be just like a figurehead monarchy. Right? So, French Revolution 1789, that is the political component. Apart from this, there is a socio-political component also. That is, after the French Revolution, feudalism ended in France. After the French Revolution, feudalism ended in France. Right? And that is why what becomes important is to understand the French society, that okay sir, you have mentioned feudalism ended in France. So to understand this line, we need to understand what was feudalism in France, right? And that is why we need to enter inside the French society. Okay, so therefore what do we see is this. If you look at the France of pre-1789, then what was the situation? If we look at the domain of polity, then because feudalism is a ism, so like capitalism is a ism, socialism is a ism, communism is a ism, similarly feudalism is also a ism. That is, these isms they represent the society as a whole, they represent their economy, society's economy, they represent society's polity, they represent society's social aspects. It is an ism. It is a way in which the system which governs the society. Right? So therefore, feudalism governed France before 1789. What was feudalism like? And feudalism was there in the whole of Europe, right? Feudalism was not there in Britain. Feudalism was not there in the US, but otherwise feudalism was there in all of these European countries. right? And when feudalism will end in these countries, what will come? Capitalism. Okay. This feudalism, it has multiple components: political, social, and economic. So first of all, in general, if you look at the polity of this era, so at the top of France there was a king. So there was a monarchy. Right? And the monarch who was there in 1789, the monarch who was there was King Louis XVI. Right? King Louis XVI was a monarch. Okay, so that is like the political part of it. If we look at the structure, अभी हम सिर्फ स्ट्रक्चर की बात करें, we are not talking about his personality, his policies, that we will discuss separately as part of the reasons for the French Revolution. So monarchy is there. Second aspect, is there any parliament? So there was no parliament, but on paper there was a body which was known as Estates General. But the last meeting of Estates General, it had happened in 1515, 1515. उसके बाद कभी मिली ही नहीं. So there was no parliament, but somewhat a body with somewhat similar function was there, but it had met last in 1515. Similar function means recommendatory function, obviously very weak. So similar but very weak, matlab cannot compare to a parliament. That's why we have mentioned no parliament. If Estates General had been such a body which had been very, very powerful, we would have mentioned that there was a parliament with a different name, Estates General. But what we have said, no parliament, but a body, Estates General, with somewhat similar function, recommendatory function, where the king can consult the people, right? So for consultation purposes, so that's why I have used the word, similar function. Similar के बजाय consultative function लिख देते. Consultative function, and it had met last in 1515, 1515. Then, apart from this, in the polity is not just about a parliament, about a king. Polity is also about the ministers. Polity is also about the people, apart from the king, who are powerful in the polity, who decide things, right? Polity, it can also include military, right? So therefore, if we look at this particular thing, then what was the situation? So nobility, that is nobles, people you call sir, people you call, barons, sirs, earls, dukes. If you have seen Game of Thrones, so therefore knights. So these people, that is the nobility, they controlled the judiciary, they controlled the bureaucracy, they controlled the army. So they had total control over the real polity, like anything. So therefore the nobility, they dominated. Dominated क्या, we should use the word controlled. Controlled and manned bureaucracy, army की जगह military, because that includes the navy also then. So therefore total control, the real control was nobility, so therefore nobility was very, very powerful. Apart from this, if you look at the polity, then the clergy were also very powerful. Who are the clergy? Clergy are basically the officials of the church, right? So Christianity was the only approved religion in France, and clergy, they were powerful. In the domain of polity, how they were powerful? There were many clergymen who were advisors to the king, and therefore they influenced political policy, although they are religious entity. They ideally should not have any role in the polity, but since they were advisors to the king, they had political power, right? So one point is some were important advisors in the king's court. That is your clergy, and therefore they are getting political influence. How they had got this right? See, the society of pre-1789, the society was very, very religious society. So therefore, there was something known as papal states. The present day Rome, it was the capital of the papal states, and that was the kingdom of Pope, right? And the world was very, very religious world. And in that world, if the Pope is saying, or if the church is saying that king has divine right to rule, then people will agree to it, the king will gain power. So if the church, but because we are in that society where reason, logic, they are on the back foot. And what is on the front foot? On the front foot, it is religion. The society is very, very religious. And therefore, the king wants the church to say this, ki sir, please keh do yaar. Huh? And the church, give and take will take place. The church will get certain things. Christianity can be the only religion. You will have to keep us as advisors, etc. Meaning, there was a quid pro quo between the king and the church, because the church said that king has divine right to rule, meaning no one can question the king's rule. Usko rule karne ki taakat Jesus Christ ne diye, Bhagwan ne diye, right? So therefore, क्विड प्रो क्वो बिटवीन चर्च एज एन इंस्टीट्यूशन एंड द किंग पहले से, ठीक है, सदा से, दैट किंग हैज डिवाइन राइट टू रूल. ओके, तो इस तरीके से इनका ताना बाना चल रहा है. नोबिलिटी इंपॉर्टेंट है सोसाइटी में, क्लर्जी इंपॉर्टेंट है सोसाइटी में, एंड ऑब्वियसली किंग इज इंपॉर्टेंट इन द सोसाइटी. ऑल पॉलिटिकल पावर इज विद देम, राइट? अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस, व्हाट डू वी सी इन द डोमेन ऑफ पॉलिटी? सो इन द डोमेन ऑफ पॉलिटी तो मेजर आपकी यही चीजें आ जाती हैं. सेकेंड एस्पेक्ट कम्स विद रिस्पेक्ट टू इन द डोमेन ऑफ सोसाइटी, और लेट्स से if you look at the society, what do we see? The society in France, it was divided into 3 estates. Important है ये point. कैसे important है? The first estate was the clergy, the second estate was the nobility, and the third estate was everyone else. Obviously king is king, वो separate है, उसको आप nobility का part मान लो, मतलब वो king है. But जो बाकी जनता है, first estate clergy, second estate nobility, and third estate the common man, that is everyone else. So therefore the third estate will include the middle classes, that is the merchant capitalists, merchants, writers, lawyers, doctors, they are part of the third estate. These are the richer sections of the third estate. That is the richer sections among the common man. Below them lie the peasants and the working class. That is the workers and the peasants, artisans and the peasants. So therefore this is the composition of the third estate, second estate and first estate, right? So society is divided into 3 estates, meaning today, for example, in India, if I am an Indian, you are also an Indian. That is it. But if the Constitution of India recognizes caste, if the Constitution of India recognizes that, one caste has certain different interests, certain different problems, and therefore its system is different. Another caste has certain different interests, different things, so therefore its privileges and the laws which govern it will be different. And rest of the caste, they are going to have something else. Then you will be saying that India is not summation of Indians. India is summation of castes, politically, right? Or socially. So therefore, Today, for example, like every French is equal to another French. They are simply French. No French will say, I am from the first estate, I am from the second estate, I am from the third estate. Same rules, equality before law applies today on the French. But in that era, different rules, different things, different taxation for the different three estates. So society, it was divided into three estates. So the third estate, it comprises of merchants, writers, doctors, lawyers, that is the middle class, right? Then there are the peasants and the workers. If you look at the composition of the peasants, they can be further divided into three, four parts. First of all, there will be peasants who are small landowners. है ना? Second can be peasants who are tenants. Tenants means who have taken land on rent and now they are ploughing that piece of land. So therefore tenants are there. ये आपने मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री में पढ़ाई हुआ टेनेंट क्या होता है, ठीक है. थर्ड आ जाता है लैंडलेस लेबरर, फॉर सिंपली प्रोवाइडिंग देयर लेबर, राइट. मे बी द टेनेंट्स एंड द स्मॉल लैंड ओनर्स, दे आर हायरिंग देम, सो देयरफॉर लैंडलेस लेबरर्स. This is the composition. If you look at the peasants, then what is happening? We'll take a look at it. First, just look at the classification. Workers, they can be classified into city workers, artisans, these kind of things. Right. So these are workers. Obviously, society is agrarian society, so the percentage of workers, they will be very, very less in the population. Percentage of the peasants will be maximum. So therefore 80% of the population was of the peasantry. 80% of the population was of the peasantry, and within this 80%, obviously the maximum, they were the landless laborers. Okay, so they had the max proportion in population, that is among peasants. ठीक है, गरीब जनता ज्यादा होगी, सबसे ज्यादा गरीब है तो सबसे ज्यादा है, ठीक है. एंड ओवरऑल पेजेंट्स आर 80% ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन. नाउ इफ यू लुक एट द मिडिल क्लास, देन योर मिडिल क्लास, इट इज रफली 8% of the population. The percentages are not important. I'm just trying to give you a hint that they are 1/10 of the population of the peasants, right? So therefore they are like 8% of the population. 8% of population, they are the middle classes. So we are just trying to see a size कि क्या है. 80% peasants है, 8% है, मतलब ये 1/10 है numbers में. If you look at the clergy, then the clergy is 0.5% of the population, and this is 1.5% of the population. These percentages are not important. I just want you to develop some kind of empathy that how little elites, how small number of elites, they are controlling the whole society's polity. Only 2% are controlling it. In fact, clergy, they will not be very much into the polity that much. Majorly nobility. So 1.5% of the population controlling the polity of the whole country, of the whole kingdom. Right? So therefore, this is a situation, society wise, this is what the situation is. Apart from this, there are other aspects. If we look at the society and the economic aspects, अगर इसमें भी हम merge कर देते हैं, socio-economic aspects इसको कह देते हैं. सोशो इकोनॉमिक अगर इसको हम बना देते हैं. सो here we can continue. So what is the situation? If you look at the economic profile, then what happens is that your clergy, it is the largest per capita owner of the land. Largest per capita owner. Per capita owner means मतलब एक बंदे के पास कितना लैंड है. So they have only 0.5% of the share in the population, but they control 10% of the land. So largest per capita owner of land. Then the nobility, the estimates vary. NCRT says something, other research papers say something, 30% to 60%. मतलब इतना ज़्यादा ही वेरिएशन है कुछ, but मोटा मोटी we can say that they at least control like 30% तो at least करते थे. So 1.5% of the population controlling 30% of the land, right? So therefore, these people they own, मतलब own क्या मतलब इसको simply बोल सकते हैं they are the they own what 10% of land and therefore largest per capita owner. Then they own roughly 30% of land, right? And these people they also own roughly 20% of land. Why? Because these are the richer sections of the society. The middle classes they are rich. Middle classes they are rich, right? Because they are earning money from all of these professions. They are earning money because of trade. They are earning money because of all of these professions. So they are rich. And 80% of the population is like this, right? So therefore, this is somewhat what the situation is, right? 20% के आसपास का इनका अपना 20%, 25% कह लो. मतलब ठीक है percentage matter नहीं करती, but हाँ, I'm just trying to tell you that these people they also own land, ठीक है? But therefore, what is the situation? Situation, if now we try to develop an imagery, then if you look at the clergy, then clergy are society wise very, very powerful because society is very religious, right? Plus they are having some kind of a political influence as well. If you look at the nobility, plus they are rich, they have land. So they will be having lot of income from the land, right? Because it is an agrarian economy. So therefore, who is the richest person? The richest person is land is the source of power in feudalism. The feudal economy, it is dominated by agriculture. And therefore, who will be the power magnet, economic power magnet of a feudal society? Landowner. A modern society, अब देख लो हम जो हमारी सोसाइटी इतना मॉडर्न होती जा रही है, अब डिजिटल टेक्नोलॉजी आ गई, सर्विसेज आ गई, पहले सर्विसेज थी नहीं है सच, इंटरनेट आ गया. So therefore, in the era of feudalism, what is the source of power? Land is the source of power. Why? Because agriculture is the main occupation. So landowner is the capitalist or landowner is the most powerful person of the feudal economy. So therefore, see the clergy, they are economically powerful, they are politically powerful, they are socially powerful. Nobility, they are controlling all polity. At the same time, they are also huge landowners. So they are economically powerful plus they are politically powerful. If you look at the middle classes, they are only sort of economically powerful, but otherwise they do not have any political power, and social wise also they are part of the third estate, that is third grade, right? So therefore, this is how the system it is developing. This is how the system it is developing. So therefore, this is a structure. Okay? Economy is obviously largely agrarian. Now, what is happening is, if you look at the economic component of it, then another aspect comes. Tax is paid only by the third estate. The first and the second estate, they do not pay any taxes, right? Whereas in the polity we see, there is no representation of the third estate. They do not have any political say. So the no taxation without representation component can fit in the French Revolution. Yes. So therefore, what do we see? In the economy, we see that all taxes, that only the third estate is the taxpayer. Only the third estate is the taxpayer. Although this principle is not 100% correct. Kaise? For example, there was a tax called taille. Taille was a tax. Okay? What was it, this tax? This was basically a tax which was applied by the state. And yes, this taille was to be paid only by the third estate. So this is a tax by the state. By the state you mean by the king, and it is payable only by the third estate. Then there was another tax that we call tithe. Tithe, it meant 1/10 of the revenue, meaning if you are doing any, if you are cultivating a piece of land and you have generated certain aggregated products from that and then you have sold them in the market, so जो भी आपका revenue हुआ उसका 1/10 आपको देना पड़ेगा, but किसको? चर्च को. So therefore you see that church has a huge amount of land. From it will be earning income. Plus from others' land, the church will be getting 1/10 of the revenue. मतलब चर्च का खुद का तो 10% लैंड है ही, उसके अलावा लेट्स से अगर कोई नोबल्स है या इफ देयर आर एनी अदर कॉमनर्स, मिडिल क्लास है, उनका भी 1/10 रेवेन्यू मेरे को मिलेगा. सो वी सी दैट चर्च इज अगेन becoming economically powerful, and these tithe and tithe, they were hated like anything. So basically it basically meant that 1/10 of revenue payable to church by every landowner. But this statement is still right that only third estate is taxpayer. Why? Because this is like sort of a contribution to the church, the tithe. Tithe is a tax by the state, right? So that's why to qualify it I mentioned कि ये statement ऐसे 100% right है, nobility भी pay करता था, but किसको? church को, state को नहीं pay करता था, state को नहीं pay करता उसको, ठीक है. So therefore these are the example that only third estate is taxpayer, tithe. This is the situation which is happening. Apart from this, another component that we see, socio-economic. So for example, there was no equality before law. What do you mean by no equality before law? For example, if a clergy has committed any crime, that he will not be tried in a civil court. He will be tried in a religious court. So special courts were there, so ecclesiastical, कुछ वो क्या बोले, ecclesiastical, ठीक है, courts, that is religious courts. So clergy can be tried only over there. They cannot be tried in civil courts. So this is like one of the example. हाँ, मतलब रफली है वो, मैंने रफ निकाला है ये, बट इनकी पॉपुलेशन बहुत कम थी, देयर लोएस्ट. अब उसको कैलकुलेशन मैं समझ रहा था कि ये आएगा डाउट, बट इतना याद रख लो बस दैट द क्लर्जी, दे वर द लार्जेस्ट पर कैपिटा ओनर ऑफ द लैंड, एंड देन द सेकंड बिगेस्ट लैंड ओनर वाज नोबिलिटी. ये परसेंटेजेस एक्चुअली क्या है, रिसर्च पेपर्स में कुछों में परसेंटेज का पॉपुलेशन ये दे रखा है, दूसरे में परसेंटेज ओनरशिप का 30% से 60% भी वैरी करता है, ठीक है, किसी में 10% से कुछ और भी वैरी करता है. तो ये रफ आइडिया देने के लिए, इसको मुझे पता था कोई ना कोई डिवाइड करेगा इसको, ठीक है. एनीवेज, सो सोशियो इकोनॉमिक में अगर आए तो बेसिकली देयर वाज नो इक्वालिटी बिफोर लॉ. दैट इज special privileges to first and the second estate. Second aspect that we see is that, for example, no person from the third estate can become a general in the army. और जनरल की बजाय हाई रैंकिंग और कैन बिकम ऑफिसर. ऑफिसर मीन्स हायर रैंक. सोल्जर तो बन सकते हैं, फुट सोल्जर. राइट, मिलिट्री ब्यूरोक्रेसी. सो दिस इज हाउ this component it is going on. Apart from this, another feature of feudalism is with money you can purchase judgeship, meaning some of the middle class of people, they could become judge by buying the post of judge, right? So judgeship, it could be bought. Right, judgeship, it could be bought. अब एक और चीज थी, छोटी सी, क्या चीज थी? फॉर एग्जाम्पल, मतलब खाने की कमी थी, मतलब ठीक है, देयर वाज अ प्रॉब्लम ऑफ फूड, राइट? फॉर एग्जाम्पल इन 1788-89 देयर वाज वन ऑफ द वर्स्ट फेमीन ऑफ France, right? So there were certain game laws. Game laws means when you're going on hunting. So the common man cannot hunt animals, right? So this was a law, and this was hated, right? So common man, so there were game laws which prohibited common man from hunting. Game laws prohibited commoner to hunt game. For example, one of the law which was brought in after the French Revolution was that these game laws, they were removed. Now everyone could hunt pigeons. किताब में लिखा हुआ है, after the French Revolution everyone could hunt pigeons. Game laws. Right? Apart from this, with respect to workers, if we see the conditions, थोड़ा सा बढ़ गया ये, एक बार वो उसको बंद कर दो, बस ये कंप्लीट हो रहा है, बस 2 मिनट आपके और ले रहा हूं, ठीक है. Then another aspect that we look, if you look at the workers, so it is very simple, very low wages for the workers. And another aspect is that there was no freedom of work. What do you mean by freedom of work? If I am a worker, I cannot shift my job until unless my present employer gives me certificate of good conduct. So as a result, I will not be able to shift jobs. Obviously, land revenue will be very high. As high as 2/3, right? So therefore, this is a situation which is there in the domain of society and in the domain of economy, right? And therefore, what do we see? That your majority of the population, which is peasantry and the working class, right, they are oppressed. Then within the middle class, within the third estate, your merchants, writers, doctors, lawyers, they are economically, they are fine, they are rich, they are educated also, but otherwise they do not have any share in polity, they do not have any share in the larger scheme of the things. They are not socially powerful, they are also not politically powerful, and therefore huge amount of grievances can develop in such a system, which did develop, and that is what we are going to discuss in our next class. So in the next class we are going to discuss at the reasons of the French Revolution. I'll try to give you a brief summary kind of it. In the next class थोड़ा सा रिवाइज भी कर लेंगे. Summary क्या है? See, good economics is good politics, इतना बस समझ लीजिए. If you look at France, then France, it fought and lost the 7-year war, 1754 to 63. After that, it made a lot of monetary expenditure during the American Revolution, specifically American War of Independence from 1776 to 1783, and it gained nothing out of that adventure. It just wanted to weaken the British. By the time of 1788, the government was under huge monetary stress. In 1788, there was a great famine also in France. At such a point of time, the monarchy tried to increase taxes. And when the monarchy tried to increase taxes, this resulted in the spirit of no taxation without representation and French Revolution. So therefore, in UPSC, if the question comes that American and the French Revolution, they had their basis in no taxation without representation, or democracy has one of the fundamental bases, or evolution of democracy has one of the fundamental bases in no taxation without representation, then you should be able to answer as my students. So sorry for taking your 8 minutes extra. I want to be punctual, but this is what it is. And in the next class, we'll be completing the French Revolution, and then we will move on to the Industrial Revolution. Thank you for your time. God bless you. खुश रहो. Feudalism, अगर हम feudalism का यही है, ठीक है, I'll explain it. Those who are interested, they can listen to it. So when we look at feudalism, so therefore in feudal society, the economy is feudal economy, right? The economy, it is feudal economy, and in that economy what happens is that economy is largely agrarian, इधर कर लो, that economy is largely agrarian. The major land owners are the nobility and the clergy, and most of the population, they are working as tenants and they have to pay huge amount of rents. These rents, they are also at times known as manorial dues, right? So therefore, majority of the population, it is doing agriculture, but it is not landowner, right? And they are under huge economic burden because of the huge. Who is the landowner? Landowner is the nobility, but who is the actual cultivator? Actual cultivator is someone else. There is a concept of serfdom, but in the case of France in 1789, no one was serf, so इसलिए उसको highlight नहीं किया. Serf is something when you are tied to the land. Since generation, my family is working and living on this piece of land, and socially I am barred from shifting away from this land to anyone. Today, if this land is owned by a particular lord, then I am a serf of that lord. If tomorrow this lord gifts this piece of land to someone else, then the new land owner will become my master and I will be his serf. He can ask me to do anything and everything. I am tied to the land. Wherever the land will go, I will be there. Land तो कहीं जाएगा नहीं, उसका owner change हो सकता है. So that is known as serfdom. I cannot shift away from this land. मेरे को इसी जमीन पे रह के अपना जिंदगी बिताना है. That is known as serfdom. But in 1789, that was not the situation. In feudalism, if you look at the feudal economy, so therefore in feudal economy, this is the situation that is there, right? Apart from this, what do we see? So there are special privileges. No tax, all the taxes, they are paid by the common man. Land ownership is highly skewed. Huge amount of rents are there on this population. When we look at the feudal polity, there is no modern polity, and there is a certain section of the society who control the polity, right? And there is no parliament, nothing. So this is like a feudal polity kind of a setup. If you look at the feudal society, then society it is characterized, no one is equal, there is no concept of equality, right? And the society it is divided into 3 estates, right? Each of the estate, it has different privilege, different status, right? So that is what is there. French Revolution, 1789, it happened. It happened within 1 year, 1789. Certain events happened continuously after that. For example, in 1792, it became a republic. So, but French Revolution, it happened 1789.